The fire crackles low, chillin', and the night presses close like the walls of them slave ships that carried our people across the dark water. My voice carries the weight of iron chains and the salt of tears shed on auction blocks from Charleston to Savannah. Tonight I speak of Lucy, Lucy of the Cage, a girl born under blood moon in Virginia soil, who spent 75 days locked in bamboo torture, yet rose up to poison the captain's food and set fire to the very foundations of bondage. This ain't no gentle tale. This is memory carved in scars, whispered in hush harbors, sung in spirituals that still echo through cotton fields. The ancestors watch, the spirits listen, and Lucy's name, Lord have mercy. Lucy's name still rings like a bell of judgment across the quarters of history. Gather close now, for what I tell you happened in them dark days of 1845, when the Mississippi ran red and the quarters knew only suffering. Listen, and remember, the belly of that slave ship was hell's own mouth, child, darker than any night the good Lord ever made. Down in them depths where human flesh pressed against human flesh, where the stink of death and despair hung thick as molasses, Lucy's mama, they called her Kessie, lay chained to the wooden planks, her belly swollen with child. The year was 1830, and the Middle Passage still churned its unholy trade across the Atlantic, stealing souls from African shores and delivering them to American bondage. Kessie come from the interior lands, past the slave castles of the Gold Coast, from a village where her people knew the old ways, the language of drums, the power of roots, the names of ancestors stretching back like rivers to the source. She was conjure-born, folks said later, marked by spirits even before the raiders came. That night they took her, the moon hid its face in shame, and the village elders wept knowing they was losing one who could speak with the dead and bend the will of growing things. Now she lay in darkness absolute, listening to the groans of the dying, the rattle of chains, the endless creak of wood against water. The ship, they called it the Nightingale, though there weren't nothing sweet about it, carried 300 souls packed tight as cordwood. Many wouldn't see American soil alive. Lord have mercy, the stories them hulls could tell. Bodies thrown overboard when fever struck, mothers wailing for babies dead at the breast, men gone mad from the suffocating dark. But Kessie held something fierce inside her. Even as the ship rolled and pitched, even as sickness claimed the woman chained beside her, even as the white sailors come down with their whips and their evil intentions, she whispered to the child in her womb. Whispered in the old tongue, the language of her people that the ocean tried to drown but couldn't. She told that baby about freedom, a word she barely understood no more, but held on to like a drowning woman holds driftwood. You gonna live, she murmured in the dark, her voice raw from thirst and screaming. You gonna see the sun, and you gonna remember who your people was. Remember the power that runs in your blood. The crossing took 43 days, suffering something terrible, as the old folks say. 43 days of darkness and death, of prayers in many tongues rising up to a God who seemed deaf to slave cries. The ship's hold became a grave for dozens. Each morning when the hatches opened and cruel sunlight stabbed down, the sailors dragged out the night's dead and threw them to the sharks that followed the vessel like demons awaiting their due. Kessie survived by will alone, by the promise she made to the child inside her, by the ancestral spirits she felt moving in the dark. She heard them sometimes, when the moaning of the living quieted, voices speaking in the old language, telling her to hold fast, to endure, to remember. The elders of her village walked in that hell ship, she swore it, their hands pressing strength into her back where the wood bit deep. Then come the night, Lord of glory, what a night it was, when Kessie's water broke. There in the pitch dark, surrounded by chains and crying and the smell of death, her body convulsed with labor. No midwife to help her, no clean water, no light. Just the heaving ship and the iron shackles and the pain that split her open like lightning splits a tree. Jesus wept, cried the woman next to her, feeling Kessie's struggle through the press of bodies. This child coming right now. Others took up the cry, and in that moment something shifted in the hold. Women who ain't spoken days found their voices. They sang, low and mournful at first, then rising like a tide. Old songs from old lands, spirituals not yet born but somehow already ancient, melodies that carried power deeper than words. The singing wrapped around Kessie like arms, like the embrace of all the mothers who ever labored in bondage, all the way back to the first woman who bore a child in chains. The baby come in darkness, slipping into hands that caught her by feel alone. A girl child, small but fierce, who didn't cry at first, just lay silent as if listening to the song that birthed her. Then she opened her mouth and wailed, and sweet Jesus, that wail carried through the hold like prophecy, like judgment, like the voice of all them stolen ancestors crying out for justice. "Lucy," Kessie gasped, the name coming to her lips like revelation. Her name be Lucy, light in the darkness. An old woman chained nearby, a root doctor from the Bight of Benin, dying slow from fever but still sharp-eyed with knowing, reached out withered fingers to touch the baby's head. She muttered words in her tongue, words of blessing and warning mixed together. "This one marked," the old woman said, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "She carry the anger of the Middle Passage in her blood. She gonna make them white devils pay or die trying. I seen it clear as I see you now. Chains and fire and blood. This baby born for revenge." Kessie held Lucy close against her breast, feeling the tiny heart beat strong and steady. She didn't know if the prophecy was blessing or curse. In that moment, covered in birthing blood and bilge water, she only knew her daughter lived, and that was miracle enough. The ship sailed on. Days passed. Some who heard the baby's birth cry said it changed something in the hold. Give folks a reason to survive, to see one more dawn. Others said it was a sign, that the ancestors was stirring, that the long night of bondage wouldn't last forever. The old root doctor died 3 days later, but her words lingered like smoke. When the Nightingale finally reached Virginia shores, when they dragged the survivors up onto the deck into blinding sunlight after weeks of darkness, Kessie emerged skeletal and hollow-eyed, but with Lucy clutched fierce against her chest. The baby had survived the Middle Passage, heavy-hearted journey that killed so many before first breath could be drawn on American soil. On the auction block at Richmond, men in fine clothes examined Kessie like she was livestock, prying open her mouth to check teeth, squeezing her arms to test strength. They paid her baby no mind at first, just another pickaninny who might live or die before she was old enough to work. A plantation owner named Harlan Cobb, mean-spirited man with cold eyes and a reputation for cruelty, bought Kessie for $800. She was strong-backed, young enough to give him years of labor and maybe more children to increase his human property. They took Kessie and Lucy to Magnolia Grove Plantation, sprawling across bottomlands near the James River. White-columned big house on the hill, fields of tobacco and cotton stretching to the horizon, and down in the lowlands, the quarters, rows of rough-hewn cabins where the enslaved lived in conditions barely better than the ship's hold. That first night in the quarters, Kessie sat with Lucy in her arms, listening to the sounds of plantation life. Overseers calling out orders, the crack of whips in distant fields, the low murmur of exhausted voices as folks returned from labor. An old woman named Aunt Dinah, conjure woman of the quarters, keeper of root knowledge, come to see the newcomer. "I dreamed you was coming," Aunt Dinah said, her eyes studying Kessie close. "Dreamed a woman from across the water carrying a child marked by fire and iron. That baby of yours," she pointed a gnarled finger at Lucy, "she gonna bring change to this place. Don't know if it be deliverance or destruction, but change coming sure as Judgment Day." Kessie rocked Lucy slow, feeling the weight of prophecy pressing down like the chains she still felt on her wrists, though they was removed. The baby stared up at her with dark eyes that seemed too knowing for an infant, eyes that reflected lamplight like coals in a fire. "They took everything from me," Kessie whispered. "My land, my people, my name. But they ain't taking her spirit. I swear on my ancestors, this child gonna be free or she gonna die fighting." Aunt Dinah nodded slow, understanding the vow. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small leather pouch filled with roots and herbs and something else. Dust from old graves, maybe, or earth from crossroads. She tied it around Lucy's neck with a strip of red cloth. "Mojo bag," she said. "Protection and power mixed. The baby needed, child born in the belly of the slave ship, baptized in Middle Passage tears, she carrying the weight of all them who died in the crossing, all them who jumped overboard rather than face bondage, all them who never saw land again. That's heavy burden for one small soul." Lucy's tiny hand closed around the mojo bag, and in that moment, or so the story goes, passed down through generations, the lamplight flickered like something invisible passed through the cabin. The old women present swore they heard singing, faint and far away, in languages nobody spoke no more. The voices of Africa calling across the water. Kessie felt it too, a presence ancient and powerful, settling over her daughter like a mantle. She didn't know if it was blessing or curse, couldn't tell if the spirits meant Lucy for salvation or sacrifice. She only knew the child she held was marked by destiny, chosen by forces older than slavery, older than the ships that brought them, old as Africa herself. Master Harlan Cobb appeared in the quarters the next morning, Overseer Cyrus Blake at his side. Cobb was a hard man, raised in the slave-holding tradition, who believed in breaking spirits early and maintaining control through fear. He looked at Kessie and Lucy with the calculating gaze of a man assessing property value. "That baby strong?" he asked Cyrus. "Appears so, Master. Survived the crossing, which is more than most." Cobb nodded. "Good. The mother can work light duties till she's fully recovered, then back to the fields. When the baby's weaned, we'll see about putting the woman to heavier labor. No use in coddling them." He started to leave, then paused, looking back at Lucy with an expression Kessie couldn't read. "Something about that child," he muttered. "Eyes too dark, too knowing. Keep watch on that one, Cyrus. I don't like the look of her." The overseer nodded, making a note in his ledger. In that ledger, Lucy's life was recorded. Born aboard the Nightingale, property of Harlan Cobb, valued at 0 until old enough to work, expected lifespan in bondage, whole life long unless death or sale intervened. But ledgers couldn't capture what Kessie knew, what Aunt Dinah sensed, what the ancestors whispered in the dark. Lucy of the Cage was born in blood and prophecy, marked by the Middle Passage, chosen by forces the white masters would never understand. And though she was just an infant wrapped in rough cloth, already the seeds of her story was planted, seeds that would grow into legend, into testimony, into a tale of suffering and revenge that folks would tell for generations. That night, as Kessie rocked Lucy to sleep, she sang a song from her homeland, words her own mama taught her before the raiders came. It was a warrior's song, fierce and mournful, about a woman who burned down the house of her enemies and walked through the flames untouched. Outside the cabin, Aunt Dinah listened to that singing and nodded slow. She knew what was coming, could feel it in her bones like weather changing. This child, this Lucy, was gonna shake the foundations of Magnolia Grove Plantation. Gonna make the masters tremble, gonna spill blood, gonna leave a mark on history that time couldn't erase. "Lord, have mercy on us all," Aunt Dinah whispered to the night. "For when that child grows strong enough to lift her hand in anger, this whole place gonna learn what it means to cross a woman born in chains but marked by the spirits for freedom." And in the big house on the hill, Master Harlan Cobb woke from uneasy dreams, troubled by visions of fire and iron, of a dark-eyed girl child standing in judgment over all he owned. And behind her, stretching back to the horizon, the ghosts of the Middle Passage, millions of souls crying out for justice, waiting for their instrument of vengeance to come of age. Lucy grew under Virginia's sun like a weed nobody wanted but couldn't kill. By the time she was 5 years old, her hands already knew the sting of labor. Picking worms off tobacco plants, carrying water to field hands, sweeping the big house porches where she weren't allowed to look white folks in the eye. She was skinny as a rail, all sharp angles and fierce eyes, with her mama's dark skin and something else, something that made overseers nervous when she stared too long. Kessie worked the fields from can't see morning till can't see night, her body bent under the weight of bondage, but her spirit still holding that African fire. She taught Lucy the old ways in whispers, how to read signs in nature, which roots had power, how to move silent through darkness. Most important, she taught her daughter never to bow her head too low, never to let them see her spirit break. "They own our bodies," Kessie would say, voice low in the cabin after dark. "But our souls belong to the ancestors. Remember that, child. Remember who you come from." The quarters at Magnolia Grove held about 80 souls. Men, women, children, all living in rough cabins with dirt floors and roofs that leaked when rains come. Families was split regular when Master Cobb sold folks off to pay debts or just for spite. Babies was born in sorrow, knowing they children of bondage. Old ones died worn down to bone and sinew, grateful for release from suffering. Aunt Dinah still kept her place as the quarter's conjure woman, though her body was failing slow. She took special interest in Lucy, teaching her root knowledge when Kessie was in the fields. The child learned fast. Too fast, some said. By 7 years old, Lucy could identify every healing herb and harmful root growing wild. She knew which plant stopped bleeding, which brought fever, which made a man's belly cramp so bad he couldn't stand. "You got the gift," Aunt Dinah told her one evening, mixing gopher dust in a clay bowl. The sight, the knowing. Dangerous thing for a slave girl to have, but useful too. Just remember, power always got a price. Use it wise. Lucy watched the old woman work, memorizing every gesture, every muttered word. She understood even then that knowledge was the only thing the masters couldn't take. They could sell your body, whip your back, work you till you dropped. But what you carried in your head, that was yours alone. Master Cobb ran his plantation with iron discipline and casual cruelty. He was a man who believed slavery was natural order, that black folks was born inferior and needed white guidance, or white violence, to keep them productive. His overseer, Cyrus Blake, was even worse. Blake was poor white trash who'd risen to power over enslaved people, and he wielded that power like a drunk man swings a bottle, wild and mean, looking for any excuse to draw blood. The whipping post stood in the center of the quarters, stark reminder of what happened to those who stepped out of line. Lucy saw her first whipping when she was 6, a field hand named Moses who'd been caught with a forbidden Bible. They stripped him naked, tied him to the post, and Blake laid into him with a bullwhip till the man's back looked like raw meat. Lucy watched, forced to watch like all the quarters folk, and something hardened in her that day. The screams, the blood, the way Moses never cried out for mercy even as his flesh tore. It burned into her memory like a brand. That night, she asked her mama why God let such things happen. Kessie was quiet a long time before answering. "I don't know, baby. Maybe God testing us? Maybe God waiting to see how much we can bear before we rise up. Or maybe..." She paused, choosing words careful. "Maybe God gave us the power to free ourselves, and we just ain't found the courage yet." Lucy was 8 when she met her brother Jem. Master Cobb bought him at auction in Richmond, a skinny boy of 6 from a plantation that had gone bankrupt. Jem's mama had died in childbirth. His daddy sold south to the cotton kingdoms of Mississippi. He arrived terrified and hollow-eyed, jumping at every sound. Lucy took him under her protection, fierce as a mother hen. She shared her meager food, taught him how to move without drawing attention, showed him which overseers was merely mean and which was downright evil. Jem clung to her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with fear. "You my sister now?" he asked one night, curled up beside her in the cabin they shared with 6 other children. "I'm your sister," Lucy confirmed, "and ain't nobody gonna hurt you long as I draw breath." It was a promise that would shape everything to come. The years passed in grinding monotony, broken by moments of terror. Families torn apart at auction, women taken to the big house for the master's pleasure. Men worked till they collapsed and left to die if they couldn't rise again. Children sold away from mothers before they was weaned. The quarters was a theater of ongoing tragedy, and every soul in it carried scars, visible and invisible. Lucy turned 10, then 12, growing tall and rail-thin, her body showing the strain of constant labor. She worked the tobacco fields now, hands stained brown from the leaves, back aching from bending over plants all day. But her mind stayed sharp, and her eyes, Lord, those eyes. They watched everything. She noted which doors in the big house stayed unlocked, which paddy rollers rode the roads at night, which white folks might look the other way if a slave was running. She was 14 when she had her first real confrontation with Cyrus Blake. It happened in the fields on a day so hot the air shimmered like water. Lucy had been working since dawn, her water bucket long since empty, when she saw Blake approach a pregnant woman named Sarah, who'd paused to catch her breath. "Get back to work," Blake snarled, raising his whip. "Sir, please," Sarah begged. "The baby kicking hard, I just need a moment." The whip cracked across her shoulders. Sarah cried out, stumbling, and something in Lucy snapped. Before she knew what she was doing, she'd stepped between Blake and Sarah, her hands raised. "She carrying a child," Lucy said, voice steady though her heart hammered. "You hurt her. You hurt Master Cobb's property. Don't reckon he'd like that." It was calculated risk, invoking the Master's economic interest. But Blake's face went purple with rage. Nobody talked back to him. Nobody. "You impudent little..." He swung the whip at Lucy. She didn't flinch, didn't cry out when the leather bit into her arm, drawing blood. Just stood there, eyes locked on Blake's face. And in that moment, he saw something that made him hesitate. A fearlessness that didn't belong in a slave girl. A promise of violence deferred but not forgotten. "Cyrus!" Master Cobb's voice rang out from his horse. He'd been riding the property and witnessed the exchange. "That's enough. The girl's got a point. Sarah's carrying another hand for my fields. No sense in damaging the merchandise." Blake lowered the whip, but the look he gave Lucy was pure murder. "This ain't over," he whispered as he passed her. "I'm gonna teach you your place, girl. Gonna break that prideful spirit if it kills you." Lucy said nothing, just helped Sarah back to her feet and returned to work. But her arm throbbed where the whip had struck, and that night when Aunt Dinah cleaned the wound, the old woman's hands trembled. "You playin' with fire, child," Dinah warned. "Blake the type to hold grudges. He gonna make you pay for that." "Let him try," Lucy said, though fear coiled in her belly like a snake. "I ain't bowing to that white trash no more. Ain't bowing to none of them." Kessie overhead and pulled Lucy aside after. "Baby, I understand your anger. Lord knows I feel it too. But you gotta be smart. Pick your battles. Blake got all the power here. He can have you whipped, sold, killed. Your pride ain't worth dying for." But Lucy shook her head. "Mama, you taught me the ancestors was watching. You said our spirits belong to them, not the masters. Well, I feel them watching now, and they ain't telling me to bow. They telling me to stand." It was the beginning of a conflict that would escalate over the next year, as Lucy continued to defy the unwritten rules of bondage. She looked overseers in the eye when they spoke to her. She helped others when they faltered, even at risk to herself. She questioned orders that made no sense, small acts of resistance, but they accumulated like tinder waiting for a spark. Blake watched her with increasing hatred, and Master Cobb grew concerned about the girl's influence on other slaves. "She's got them thinking they're more than property," he complained to his wife over dinner in the big house. "I should sell her, but she's too good a worker. Maybe a proper breaking will settle her." The breaking came when Lucy was 15, on a day that would alter the course of many lives. It started with Jem, who'd grown into a sweet-natured 10-year-old boy, beloved in the quarters for his gentle ways. He'd been assigned to carry water to the cotton gin house, heavy buckets that bowed his thin arms. Lucy was working nearby when she heard Jem cry out. She dropped her hoe and ran, finding her brother sprawled on the ground, a broken bucket beside him, water soaking into the red clay. Blake stood over him, whip raised. "Clumsy little..." Blake started. "Don't..." Lucy's voice cut through the air like a knife. She positioned herself over Jem's body, her arms spread wide. "He just a child. The bucket was old, it broke, ain't his fault." Blake's eyes glittered with something terrible, the look of a man who'd been waiting for this moment. "Well now," he said slowly, "looks like Lucy of the quarters thinks she can tell me what to do. Thinks she's better than her station. Time somebody taught you different." He grabbed Lucy's arm and she fought. God help her, she fought like a wildcat. Her nails raked his face, drawing blood, and Blake howled in rage. Other overseers came running, and it took 3 men to subdue her, to drag her, kicking and screaming, toward the whipping post. The quarters emptied as folks gathered to watch, horror on their faces. Cassie pushed through the crowd, trying to reach her daughter, but guards held her back. Lucy was stripped to the waist and bound to the post, her hands tied so tight the rope cut her wrists. Blake approached with his favorite whip, the one with metal tips that tore flesh like claws. "You gonna learn today what happens to uppity niggers who forget their place," he said, loud enough for all to hear. The first strike landed like fire across Lucy's back. She bit her lip till blood came, determined not to scream, not to give Blake the satisfaction. The second strike, the third. Her back opened up in ribbons of torn skin, blood running down to soak her rough cotton skirt. Somewhere in the crowd, Jem was sobbing, calling her name. Cassie was wailing, held back by too many hands. And Lucy, oh Lucy. She clung to consciousness by will alone, her mind retreating to a place beyond pain, where the ancestors walked and justice waited. 10 lashes, 15, 20. Blake was working himself into a frenzy, enjoying her suffering, when suddenly Master Cobb appeared. "That's enough," Cobb said sharply. "You've made your point. Any more and she won't be able to work for weeks. I can't afford that." Blake reluctantly lowered the whip, breathing hard. "She needs to learn." "She's learned. Cut her down." They released Lucy's bonds, and she collapsed, unable to stand. Cassie rushed forward, catching her daughter before she hit the ground. Other women helped carry Lucy back to the quarters, where Aunt Dinah waited with her herbs and poultices. That night was agony. Lucy lay on her stomach while Dinah cleaned the wounds, applying salves that stung like hellfire but would prevent infection. Cassie sat beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face, singing old songs of comfort in the African tongue. "Hush now, baby," she whispered. "You gonna heal. You gonna live." But Lucy's eyes, when they opened, held something new. Not defeat. Never defeat. But a cold, calculating rage that frightened even her mama. It was the look of someone who'd crossed a line from which there was no return. "I'm gonna kill him," Lucy whispered, her voice rough from screaming she couldn't hold back. "I swear on every ancestor that watches over me, Blake gonna die by my hand. I don't care if it costs my life. He gonna die." Cassie wanted to tell her no, wanted to warn her that revenge only brought more suffering. But looking at her daughter's torn back, at the blood soaking through the bandages, at the fire in those 2 knowing eyes, she couldn't speak the words. Because she felt it too. That burning need for justice, for retribution, for the scales to balance even if it meant sacrificing everything. "Then you gotta be smart," Cassie finally said. "Can't just go at him wild. Need a plan. Need to survive long enough to see it through." Lucy nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "I'll survive. Whatever it takes, Mama, I'll survive. Because I got purpose now. Blake marked my back, but I'm gonna mark his grave." Outside the cabin, Aunt Dinah stood in the dark, listening. She'd seen this before. The moment when suffering transformed into something harder, sharper. Lucy wasn't just a slave girl no more. She was becoming something the masters feared most. A soul so wounded that death held no terror, so enraged that no punishment could deter her. "Lord have mercy," Dinah whispered to the night. "The fire been lit. Ain't no putting it out now." And indeed, something had shifted in the quarters that night. The enslaved folks who witnessed Lucy's defiance and Blake's cruelty felt it. A stirring of something long dormant. Whispers spread through the cabins. Lucy stood up to them. Lucy fought back. Lucy got 20 lashes but didn't break. Maybe, just maybe, the masters wasn't all powerful as they seemed. In the big house, Master Cobb lay awake, troubled by the day's events. He'd seen something in Lucy's eyes when they cut her down. Not submission, but promise. The promise of trouble to come, of consequences not yet paid. "Should have sold her when I had the chance," he muttered into the darkness. But it was too late for that now. The spark had been struck, and unknown to everyone except the spirits that walked the quarters at night, a flame was beginning to burn. A flame that would consume more than anyone could imagine and leave Magnolia Grove Plantation transformed by blood and vengeance. Lucy's back healed slow over the next weeks, leaving scars that twisted like lightning across her skin, a permanent map of Blake's hatred carved into her flesh. She returned to the fields quiet and watchful, moving through her tasks with mechanical precision, while her mind worked constant, plotting, calculating, waiting for the right moment. The other slaves noticed the change in her, how she'd gone from fierce and vocal to silent as a ghost. But her eyes, Lord have mercy. Those eyes burned with such cold fire that even the boldest overseers felt uneasy when she looked their way. Cyrus Blake, though, he didn't have sense enough to be afraid. He saw Lucy's silence as victory, proof that he'd finally broken that uppity girl's spirit. He took to parading past her in the fields, making comments just loud enough for her to hear, reminders of the whipping, threats of what he'd do if she stepped out of line again, crude suggestions about other ways he might teach her obedience. Each word was a nail driven deeper into his own coffin, though he was too stupid to know it. "That Blake man is vexed in the head," Aunt Dinah said one evening as she checked Lucy's healing wounds. "He poking at a hornet's nest and calling it a game. Don't he know some folks can't be broke, only bent till they spring back twice as hard?" Lucy said nothing, just stared at the cabin wall where shadows danced in lamplight like spirits waiting to be called. Her silence worried Kessie more than her earlier defiance had. At least when Lucy was fighting openly, her mama could see what was coming. This quiet, this stillness, it reminded Kessie of the calm before hurricanes back in Africa, when the air would go heavy and strange, and you knew devastation was gathering strength just beyond sight. 3 weeks after the whipping, the incident with Jem happened that would change everything. The boy had been assigned to the gin house again, this time helping sort cotton bolls for processing. It was hot, suffocating work in a building that trapped heat like an oven. And Jem, sweet, gentle Jem who never caused trouble, who did everything asked of him. He made the mistake of pausing to wipe sweat from his eyes. Blake saw him stop. That's all it took. Just a moment's rest from a 10-year-old child worked to exhaustion. And Blake came storming across the gin house floor like judgment itself, his face red with rage that had nothing to do with Jem's pause and everything to do with the anger he carried like disease. "You lazy little." Blake grabbed Jem by the collar, lifting him half off his feet. "Think you can slack off on my watch?" Lucy was outside hauling water when she heard Jem cry out. The sound cut through the summer heat like a knife through flesh, and she dropped the buckets, water splashing across red clay as she ran. She burst into the gin house to find Blake dragging Jem toward the door, the boy's feet scrambling for purchase, terror written clear across his face. "Let him go!" Lucy's voice rang out like a bell of judgment. "He just a child. He'd been working since dawn." Blake turned, and the smile that spread across his face was purely evil. "Well, well. Little Lucy come to save her brother, again. Thought I taught you about interfering with my business." He threw Jem aside. The boy hit the ground hard, crying, and advanced on Lucy with deliberate slowness. Other workers had stopped to watch, creating a circle of witnesses to what everyone knew was coming. This wasn't about discipline or plantation order. This was personal. This was Blake settling scores. "Please, sir," Lucy said, and the please tasted like poison on her tongue, but she forced it out. "Don't hurt him. He ain't done nothing wrong. If you need to punish someone, punish me." "Oh, I intend to," Blake said, "but not with the whip this time. No, I got something better in mind. Something that'll teach you and every other nigger on this plantation what happens when you forget your place." He called for other overseers, and they came running. 4 white men who shared Blake's casual cruelty. Lucy fought when they grabbed her, fought like she'd been raised by wildcats, her nails drawing blood, her teeth finding flesh. But there were too many of them, and in the end they dragged her into the yard where all the quarters could see, where Master Cobb was riding up on his horse to witness the spectacle. "What's the meaning of this, Cyrus?" Cobb demanded, though his tone suggested he already knew and wasn't entirely opposed. "This girl's been causing trouble since the day she was born," Blake announced loud enough for everyone to hear. defying orders, attacking overseers, spreading sedition among the other slaves. Time for a lesson that'll stick. Time for everyone to see what rebellion costs. That's when Lucy saw it. The bamboo cage. Sweet Jesus. Where'd it come from? It stood taller than a man, but barely wider than shoulders. Constructed from river cane woven tight with thorns worked into the weave, so you couldn't lean against the bars without getting stuck. Blake's creation, folks whispered later. He'd built it special over the past weeks, planning for this moment, anticipating his revenge. 75 days, Blake declared, his voice carrying across the yard. That's how long she's gonna stay in this cage. No shelter from sun or rain. Food and water when I remember to give it. Let's see how long that prideful spirit lasts when she's baking in Virginia heat or shivering through night cold. Cyrus. Master Cobb hesitated, knowing this was extreme even by plantation standards. She attacked me, Blake said, showing scratches on his arms. Under Virginia law, I got the right to discipline as I see fit, unless you want to undermine my authority in front of all these slaves. Cobb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He couldn't afford to appear weak, couldn't let slaves think they could challenge overseers without consequence. Very well. But 75 days seems excessive. Make it 75, Blake insisted. Or I quit and take my reputation with me. Tell every plantation owner in Virginia you can't control your property. It was blackmail, pure and simple. And Cobb knew it. But Blake was right. Word that Magnolia Grove had discipline problems would make it harder to sell slaves, harder to maintain order. Economics trumped mercy every time in the calculus of bondage. 75 days, Cobb agreed reluctantly. But if she dies, it's on your head. They stripped Lucy down to her shift, humiliating her before the crowd, and forced her into the cage. The space was so narrow she could barely turn around, couldn't sit properly, couldn't lie down. The bamboo pressed close on all sides, thorns catching her skin whenever she moved. They locked it with an iron padlock and positioned it in the center of the quarters where everyone would see, where Lucy's suffering would serve as warning and example. Mama, Jem was crying, reaching for Lucy through the bars. Don't let them do this. Kessie held him back, her face a mask of anguish. Lucy looked at her mama through the bamboo, and something passed between them. A silent communication older than words, deep as the Middle Passage, fierce as the African sun. I'll survive this, Lucy said quietly, meant for her mama's ears alone. And when I do, I'm gonna make them pay. All of them, but especially him. Blake heard her and laughed. 75 days, girl, in this heat. You'll be begging for death by day 10, begging me for mercy by day 20. And when you finally break, and you will break, everyone's gonna know that Cyrus Blake don't tolerate no uppity niggers on his watch. The first night in the cage was pure suffering. Lucy couldn't find a position that didn't press thorns into her flesh. The space was too small to stretch her legs, too narrow to relax her arms. When she tried to lean against the bars, the thorns bit deep. When she stood upright, her legs cramped. When she squatted, her thighs burned with strain. And the thorns, Lord of glory, the thorns, they was everywhere, worked into the weave so careful that any movement meant fresh wounds. By dawn, Lucy's shift was spotted with blood from dozens of small cuts, and her body screamed with exhaustion from a night without proper rest. The sun rose like a curse, beating down on the cage with merciless intensity. There was no shade, no shelter. The bamboo trapped heat like a kiln, and Lucy felt herself baking, sweat pouring off her body faster than she could replace it. Blake brought water once that first day. A tin cup passed through the bars, barely enough to wet her tongue, let alone sustain life in that heat. Folks from the quarters would sneak by when overseers weren't watching, passing her scraps of food, drops of water, whispered encouragements. Kessie came every chance she got, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter suffer. Hold on, baby, Kessie whispered. The ancestors watching. They gonna give you strength. I know, Mama, Lucy said through cracked lips. I feel them. Every one of them who died in chains, who suffered on the ships, who broke under the whip, they all here with me, and they all saying the same thing: survive. Survive and make them pay. Aunt Dinah visited too, bringing herbs hidden in her apron. "Chew this slow," she said, passing a root through the bars when guards weren't looking. "It'll help with the pain. Keep your mind sharp. You're gonna need your wits about you, child. This just the beginning of your trial." "What you see coming?" Lucy asked, knowing the old woman had the sight. Dinah's eyes went distant, seeing something beyond the present moment. "I see fire," she whispered. "Fire and blood and a reckoning that's gonna shake this whole plantation to its foundations. But first," she focused on Lucy again. "First you gotta survive the cage. Gotta let it break your body but not your spirit. Gotta come out the other side harder than when you went in." "How?" Lucy asked. "How do I survive 75 days of this?" "By remembering who you are," Dinah said firmly. "You ain't just Lucy the slave girl. You the daughter of Africa, born in the belly of the beast, marked by prophecy, chosen by spirits for something greater. This cage," she gestured at the bamboo prison, "it ain't strong enough to hold what you really are. It can cage your body, but your soul belonged to the ancestors, and they don't bow to no white man's cruelty." That second night, when fever started from dehydration and the wounds from thorns began to fester, Lucy felt herself slipping toward darkness. Her vision blurred, her thoughts scattered like leaves in wind. She was dying. She could feel it, and part of her welcomed it as release from endless suffering. Then she heard singing, faint at first, like echoes from very far away, but growing stronger. Voices in languages she shouldn't understand but somehow did. The voices of the Middle Passage, the voices of Africa. The voices of every slave who ever suffered and died in bondage. They sang of endurance, of resistance, of a justice delayed but never denied. And Lucy understood. She couldn't die. Not yet. Not before settling accounts. Not before showing the masters that some spirits can't be broken, only tempered into weapons sharper than any they'd ever faced. "I'm gonna live," she whispered to the night, to the ancestors, to herself. 75 days, I'm gonna count every single one. And when they open this cage, I'm walking out with my head high and my purpose clear. Blake think he's teaching me a lesson? He's right. But it ain't the lesson he intends. On the third morning, when the sun came up brutal and unforgiving, Lucy was still alive, still conscious, still watching Blake with eyes that promised retribution. And Blake, looking at her, felt for the first time a cold finger of doubt trace down his spine. Because Lucy wasn't begging, wasn't crying, wasn't breaking. She was hardening. Time moved different in the cage, child. Each hour stretched long as a day, each day long as a week, and the suffering, Lord have mercy. The suffering was something terrible to behold. By day 5, Lucy's skin had blistered from the sun, her lips cracked and bleeding, her throat so dry every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. The thorns had done their work too, leaving her shift stained with blood, and her body marked with dozens of infected wounds that wept yellow pus in the heat. But she didn't break, didn't beg, didn't give Blake the satisfaction of seeing her spirit crushed. The quarters watched in horrified fascination as the days crawled by, 10, 15, 20. Women would weep as they passed the cage on their way to the fields. Men would clench their fists in impotent rage, knowing that any attempt to free Lucy would result in their own deaths. Children stared with wide, frightened eyes, learning early what bondage truly meant, what price was paid for defiance. Kessie aged years in those first weeks. Her face became gaunt, her eyes hollow with sleeplessness and worry. She worked the fields in a daze, her mind always on her daughter locked in that terrible cage. At night, she would lie awake listening to Lucy's occasional cries when the pain became too much, when fever dreams made her call out in languages she'd never spoken. The old tongues of Africa, passed down through blood and memory from her mama's mama's mama. "She dying," one of the field hands said to Kessie on day 23. "Ain't no way a body can survive this much longer. You need to prepare yourself." But Kessie shook her head fierce. "You don't know my daughter. She got something inside her, something that won't quit. won't surrender. She gonna live. I feel it in my bones. And she was right, though how Lucy survived nobody could quite explain. Some said it was pure stubbornness. Others whispered about conjure, about how Aunt Dinah visited the cage at night when guards were drowsy, passing roots and herbs through the bars, muttering incantations in the old language. A few swore they saw spirits surrounding the cage after dark, ghostly figures standing watch over Lucy, lending her strength from beyond the veil. The truth was all of these things and more. Lucy survived because she had to, because something deep in her soul refused to give Blake the victory, because the ancestors whose voices she heard in fever dreams demanded she endure, promising that her suffering would be repaid 100-fold if she could just hold on. By day 30, Lucy had entered a strange state between life and death. Her body was skeletal, her skin stretched tight over bones, her eyes sunken deep in their sockets. She no longer fully inhabited the physical world, spending long hours in visions where the past and present merged. She saw the slave ships crossing the Atlantic, saw her mama chained in the hold, saw countless souls thrown overboard to feed the sharks. She saw auction blocks and whipping posts and cotton fields stretching to horizons stained red with enslaved blood. And she saw fire. Great cleansing fires consuming plantation big houses, turning them to ash while enslaved people danced in the light. She saw overseers screaming as justice caught up with cruelty. She saw herself standing in the ruins, free at last, with blood on her hands and freedom in her heart. You seeing the future? Aunt Dinah told her during one midnight visit, when the old woman pressed a root into Lucy's palm. The spirits showing you what's to come if you survive this trial. They testing you, child, breaking you down so they can rebuild you stronger. You ain't just Lucy no more. You becoming something else. Something the master's gonna fear when they finally understand what they created. What am I becoming? Lucy whispered, her voice barely human anymore, rough as gravel from dehydration and screaming. Vengeance, Dinah said simply. Retribution. The answer to 1,000,000 prayers whispered in slave quarters across this cursed land. You think you suffering for nothing? No, child. Every lash that ever fell on black backs, every baby torn from black mothers, every soul that died in bondage, they all pouring their pain into you, making you into the weapon they never could be. The cage ain't killing you, it's forging you. Days 40 through 50 were the worst. Storms rolled through Virginia, bringing rain that should have been relief, but instead became fresh torture. Water streamed through the bamboo cage, soaking Lucy to the bone, bringing temperatures down so she shivered violently through long nights. When the sun returned, steam rose from the wet bamboo, turning the cage into a sweatbox that made breathing almost impossible. Lucy developed a terrible cough, her lungs struggling with the damp. Infection spread through her thorn wounds, fever burning her from the inside while chills shook her from without. More than once, folks checking on her thought she'd finally died, finding her so still and pale she looked like a corpse. But then her eyes would open, those burning eyes that had lost all softness, all mercy, all of youth's innocence. And they'd know she was still fighting, still enduring, still counting down the days until Blake's reckoning came due. Master Cobb visited the cage on day 55, disturbed by reports of Lucy's condition. He'd agreed to the punishment but hadn't quite grasped the full horror of it until seeing Lucy up close. A living skeleton wrapped in bloody rags, her body covered in wounds, her eyes wild with fever and visions. Good God, Cobb muttered, genuinely shocked despite his years immersed in slavery's cruelties. Cyrus, this has gone too far. The girl's half dead already. The agreement was 75 days, Blake said coldly. He'd taken to drinking heavy over the past weeks, bothered by something he wouldn't name. A growing unease whenever he looked at Lucy, a sense that he'd made a terrible mistake but was too proud to admit it. 20 more days and she's free, if she lives that long. And if she dies, Blake shrugged. Then she dies, one less troublemaker on the plantation. You'll recoup the investment when you breed that mother of hers again. These niggers breed like rabbits anyway. The casual cruelty of it, the reduction of human life to livestock economics, made even Cobb uncomfortable. though he'd built his fortune on the same calculations. Still, he was a practical man, and Lucy alive was worth something. Lucy dead was a complete loss. 20 more days, Cobb said. But if she dies before then, we'll have problems, Cyrus. The other slaves are watching this. Push them too hard and we'll have a rebellion on our hands. Blake laughed harshly. They ain't got the spine for rebellion. I've broke every man, woman, and child on this plantation. They know what happens to uppity niggers. He gestured at Lucy. And they'll stay in line. But Blake was wrong about that, and somewhere in his whiskey-soaked brain he knew it. The quarters were changing. Whispers moved through the cabins at night. Careful conversations about Lucy's endurance, about what it meant that she wouldn't break, about whether the time was coming to resist in ways small and large. Blake's cruelty had been meant to terrify them into submission, but instead it was teaching them something far more dangerous, that the masters weren't gods, that some spirits couldn't be crushed, that suffering could transform into strength. The final 20 days passed in a blur of agony and transcendence. Lucy was no longer fully present in her body. She floated above it most times, watching from a distance as her physical form continued its slow dissolution. She spoke with the ancestors constantly now, long conversations in the night about justice and revenge, about the price of freedom and the cost of bondage. They showed her things, secret things, the old knowledge that had survived the Middle Passage hidden in the memories of conjure women and root doctors. How to mix poisons that killed slow and silent, leaving no trace for white doctors to find. Which plants could cloud men's minds, make them see things that weren't there, turn them against each other. How to move through darkness invisible as smoke. How to speak words of power that bent the will and broke the spirit. "You're gonna need this knowledge," one ancestor told her. A woman who'd been a priestess before the slavers came, who'd kept her power even in chains until the day she walked into the ocean and let it take her. "When you walk out of this cage, you're gonna have work to do. Important work, the kind that shifts the foundations of the world." "I just want Blake dead," Lucy said in one of her lucid moments. "Blake is nothing," the priestess replied. "A small evil in a vast system of evil. But you're right, he dies first. His death will be the spark. What comes after you, that's up to you and your people. The spirits can show the way, but humans gotta walk the path." On day 73, Blake got drunk and nearly opened the cage early, desperate to be free of Lucy's accusing stare, those eyes that haunted his dreams and made him wake screaming in the night. But pride held him back. 2 more days. Just 2 more days and he'd have his victory, would have proven that no slave, no matter how stubborn, no matter how touched by conjure, could defy Cyrus Blake and remain unbroken. Day 74 dawned clear and hot. Lucy hung limp in the cage, barely conscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. The quarters gathered close despite the overseer's orders to get to work. Sensing that something significant was approaching, Kessie stood nearest, her face wet with tears, one hand reaching toward her daughter but not quite touching the blood-stained bamboo. "One more day, baby," Kessie whispered. "Just one more day and you're free. Hold on. Please, Lucy, hold on." Lucy's eyes opened, just barely, and she looked at her mama. What Kessie saw in those eyes frightened her more than anything she'd witnessed in all her years of bondage. There was nothing human left in Lucy's gaze, only hunger, only purpose, only the cold promise of violence yet to come. "I held on, Mama," Lucy rasped. 75 days. I counted every one. And Blake. A smile twisted her cracked lips. Terrible to see. Blake gonna pay. They all gonna pay. I swear it on every soul that died in the cage with me. That night, the 74th night, strange things happened on Magnolia Grove Plantation. Overseers reported seeing lights moving through the quarters, hearing drums beat though no drums were found, smelling smoke though nothing burned. The horses went wild in their stables, screaming and kicking till several broke their legs and had to be destroyed. Dogs howled at something only they could see, refusing to be silenced no matter how their handlers beat them. And above the cage where Lucy hung, suspended between life and death, folks swore they saw them, the ancestors. Hundreds of ghostly figures forming a circle, chanting in languages forgotten, calling down power from the spirit's world into the physical realm, preparing their chosen instrument for the work ahead. Blake saw them too, drunk as he was. He stumbled out of his cabin and looked toward the cage, and the fear that gripped his heart in that moment was like nothing he'd ever felt. Because he understood finally, too late, what he'd done. He hadn't broken Lucy. He'd forged her into something far worse than a rebellious slave. He'd created a weapon, baptized in suffering, sanctified by the ancestors, unstoppable as Judgment Day. Dawn came today 75 like a revelation. The whole plantation gathered, master, overseers, field hands, house servants, everyone, all drawn by some unspoken compulsion to witness the moment when the cage would open and Lucy would emerge. Blake approached with the key, his hands trembling despite all the whiskey he'd consumed to steady his nerves. He unlocked the padlock and swung open the bamboo door, then stepped back quickly, suddenly afraid of what might come out. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Lucy stirred. Slowly, painfully, she unfolded herself from the cage's confines, standing on legs that should have been too weak to support her weight. Her shift hung in tatters. Her body was a map of suffering, bones showing through skin, wounds everywhere, the very image of torture endured. But she stood, and she looked at Blake with eyes that burned with such fierce light that he took an involuntary step backward. 75 days, Lucy said, her voice carrying across the silent yard. I survived. I didn't break. I didn't beg. And now, she smiled that terrible smile again. Now we see what happens when you try to cage something that was meant to be free. She took a step forward, then another, walking past Blake with her head held high despite everything she'd endured. The crowd parted before her like water, and Lucy walked through them toward the quarters, toward her mama's waiting arms, toward the next chapter of a story that was about to turn very, very dark for the masters of Magnolia Grove Plantation. Kessie caught Lucy as her daughter's legs finally gave out, lowering her gently to the ground outside the cabin. The crowd dispersed slowly, folks muttering prayers and warnings in hushed tones, casting nervous glances at Blake, who stood frozen near the empty cage, his face pale as milk. Master Cobb barked orders to get everyone back to work, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Something had shifted on Magnolia Grove, and every soul present felt it like pressure before a storm. Inside the cabin, Aunt Dinah was already waiting with her healing tools spread across a rough wooden table. Clay pots of salve made from comfrey and calendula, strips of clean cloth boiled in water infused with white oak bark, dried roots that would fight infection, and other things, darker things, wrapped in red flannel and tied with black thread. The old woman had been preparing for this moment since the cage was first built, knowing Lucy would need more than ordinary medicine to survive what was coming. Lay her here, Dinah instructed, indicating a pallet covered with fresh straw and clean sheets, luxuries in the quarters saved for this occasion. Gentle now. Her body been through hell and ain't quite decided if it wants to stay in this world or follow the spirits that been calling her. Kessie and two other women, Sarah, the pregnant woman Lucy had defended, and an elder named Ruth whose hands knew healing, carefully positioned Lucy on the pallet. In the daylight streaming through the cabin's single window, Lucy's condition was even more horrifying than it had appeared in the cage. Every rib showed clear through skin gone translucent as paper. Her arms and legs were twigs that might snap with rough handling. The wounds from thorns had festered into angry red infections, and fever burned so hot you could feel it radiating off her body like heat from a cook fire. "Sweet Jesus," Ruth whispered, making the sign of the cross, though such Catholic gestures were forbidden among the enslaved. "Child shouldn't be alive looking like this." "But she is alive," Dinah said firmly, beginning to work with movements efficient from decades of practice. "And she gonna stay that way because the ancestors ain't done with her yet. Now hush your worry, and help me clean these wounds before the rot spreads deeper." They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, washing Lucy's body with water boiled with healing herbs, applying poultices to the worst infections, wrapping wounds in clean bandages. Lucy drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering in languages none of them knew, sometimes crying out against enemies only she could see, sometimes lying so still they had to check her breath to know she lived. Jem came by during the noon break, his young face twisted with guilt and grief. "This my fault," he sobbed, kneeling beside Lucy's pallet. "She got put in that cage 'cause of me, 'cause I was too weak to stand up to Blake myself." Kessie pulled the boy close. "Hush now. This ain't your fault. Lucy made her own choice. She always been the type to stand between others and harm, even when it cost her dear. You honor her sacrifice by living, by getting strong, by remembering what they'd done to her." "I hate them," Jem said, his voice carrying a bitterness that seemed too old for his years. "I hate Blake and Master Cobb and all the white folks who think they can treat us like animals. I wish—" He stopped, looking at Lucy's ravaged form. "I wish I could make them suffer like they made her suffer." "Careful what you wish for, child," Aunt Dinah said without looking up from her work. "Hate's a powerful thing, can consume you if you ain't careful. But channeled right," she met Jem's eyes with a meaningful look, "hate can also be a tool, a weapon. Your sister understands that now. When she wakes proper, she gonna teach us all about turning suffering into strength." Through that first day and into the night, they kept vigil over Lucy. Kessie refused to leave her daughter's side, spooning broth into her mouth when she was conscious enough to swallow, wiping her face with cool cloths when fever spiked, singing the old songs from across the water that somehow seemed to soothe Lucy, even in her deepest delirium. On the second day after her release, Lucy opened her eyes with clarity for the first time since the cage. She looked around the cabin, taking in the concerned faces gathered near, the smell of healing herbs, the feel of clean cloth against her skin. For a moment, confusion crossed her features. Had she died? Was this some afterlife the ancestors promised? "You alive, baby," Kessie said softly, reading her daughter's expression. "You survived. You're free of the cage." "Free," Lucy repeated, the word tasting strange on her tongue. She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't obey, muscles too wasted to support even her diminished weight. Frustration flashed across her face, then something harder. "How long I been out?" "2 days since you walked out of that cage," Dinah answered. "You been fevered mostly, talking with spirits and such. But you coming back to us now. Coming back changed, I reckon." Lucy's eyes found the old conjure woman. "I saw them. The ancestors, they showed me things, taught me things. I know they did, I could feel it, the power gathering around you like storm clouds. You've been marked, child. Chosen. The question now is what you gonna do with what you've been given." Before Lucy could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Voices raised in argument, then Blake's distinctive snarl cutting through other sounds. Kessie moved to the door, peering out cautiously. "Blake's out there, drunk as a lord," she reported quietly, arguing with some of the other overseers. Something about the cage, about how it didn't work like he planned, about how he needs to finish what he started. A cold smile crossed Lucy's face, the same terrible expression that had frightened her mama when she first emerged from the cage. "Let him come. I ain't afraid of that man no more. Ain't afraid of nothing after what I survived." "You should be afraid," Ruth said urgently. "Blake's the type to do something rash when he's drinking. Might try to hurt you worse, claim you was insubordinate or tried to attack him. Master Cobb might look the other way if Blake says the right things." But Lucy shook her head, wincing at the movement. "He won't touch me again. I know this in my bones, the ancestors promised. Blake's time coming soon. Real soon. I just gotta be patient little while longer." "What you planning?" Kessie asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as if consulting with voices only she could hear. When she spoke, her voice carried weight of prophecy, of absolute certainty. "They gonna assign me to kitchen duty once I'm strong enough to work. Master Cobb won't want me in the fields where I might cause trouble, and Blake won't want me near him if he can help it. So kitchen duty. close to the big house, close to where the masters take their meals. Understanding dawned on Aunt Dinah's face. "Root work," she said simply. "Root work," Lucy confirmed. "Slow work, patient work, the kind that don't show till it's too late to fix. You gonna teach me, Aunt Dinah. Teach me everything you know about the plants that harm instead of heal, about the powders that confuse the mind and weaken the body, about the careful art of revenge served cold." "That's murder you talking about," Ruth said, horrified. "They catch you poisoning white folks, they'll burn you alive. Torture you till you tell them everyone who helped. We'll all hang. They won't catch me," Lucy said with quiet confidence. "The ancestors teaching me how to move unseen, how to work subtle. By the time symptoms show, won't be no way to trace it back to any particular meal or any particular hand. And even if they suspect," she smiled that terrible smile again, "I already survived the worst they could do. What more they gonna take from me that I ain't already lost in that cage?" The women exchanged uneasy glances. What Lucy proposed was dangerous beyond measure, not just for herself, but for everyone in the quarters. If discovered, the master's revenge would be comprehensive and brutal. Yet looking at Lucy's ravaged body, at the scars and wounds and wasted flesh that bore witness to 75 days of calculated cruelty, how could they argue? How could they claim the moral high ground when they'd all stood by helpless, while one of their own was tortured for the crime of defending a child? "I'll teach you," Aunt Dinah said finally. "But we do this careful. We do this smart. And we do this knowing that once we start down this path, there ain't no turning back. Blood calls for blood, and the spirits exact their own price for the power they grant." "I know," Lucy said. "I already paid part of that price in the cage. The rest," she looked at each woman in turn, "the rest I'll pay gladly if it means Blake dies screaming, and the masters learn that some folks can't be broken without consequences." Over the next weeks, as Lucy slowly regained her strength, 2 educations took place in that cabin. During the day, when overseers might check in, she practiced normal tasks, sewing, simple crafts, anything to rebuild the fine motor control the cage had stolen. But at night, when darkness covered the quarters and the white folks slept secure in their beds, Aunt Dinah taught Lucy the deadly arts. She learned which mushrooms looked innocent but stopped a man's heart within hours, which roots caused fever that mimicked natural illness, which leaves, when dried and powdered fine as dust, could be slipped into food and cause slow decline over weeks. Weight loss, confusion, weakness, finally death that doctors would attribute to consumption or other natural causes. "Most important thing," Dinah instructed, "is patience. You can't just poison a man and expect to get away with it. Gotta be subtle. Gotta make it look natural. Small doses over time. Let the body destroy itself while you stay invisible." Lucy proved an excellent student, her mind sharp despite her body's weakness. She memorized recipes for death, practiced grinding herbs to the exact consistency needed, learned to hide her preparations in plain sight among the legitimate medicines Dinah kept. And all the while, she grew stronger. Not back to what she'd been before the cage. That innocent, defiant girl was gone forever. But into something harder, something forged in suffering and tempered in hate. By the 6th week after her release, Lucy could walk without assistance, though she remained painfully thin. Master Cobb summoned her to the big house, looking her over with the assessing gaze he usually reserved for horses or hunting dogs. "You're recovered enough to work," he said. "I'm assigning you to kitchen duty under Cook Mary. You'll help with meal preparation, cleaning, serving when needed. Blake wants you back in the fields, but I think you'll cause less trouble where I can keep an eye on you. Prove me right, girl, or the cage won't seem so bad compared to what comes next." Lucy kept her eyes downcast, her posture submissive, the perfect image of a broken slave. "Yes, master, thank you, master." But inside, triumph sang through her veins. The ancestors had promised, and the ancestors had delivered. She was exactly where she needed to be, with access to the master's food, with opportunity to practice what Dinah taught her, with Blake's death now just a matter of time and timing. That night, she knelt beside her pallet and whispered prayers of gratitude to the spirits who'd sustained her through the cage, who'd taught her the dark arts of retribution, who'd positioned her perfectly for what came next. She promised them Blake's death as first payment for their help, and she promised them something more, that his death would only be the beginning, the spark that set fire to the whole plantation's foundation of cruelty. 75 days I suffered, Lucy whispered to the darkness. Now Blake gonna suffer 75 days of poison in his body, eating him from the inside out. And when he finally dies, screaming and afraid, only then will we be even. Only then will the scales balance. Outside, an owl called 3 times, an omen of death approaching. Lucy smiled, recognizing the ancestors' approval, and began planning her revenge in earnest. The big house kitchen was a world unto itself, child, a domain of fire and iron where enslaved hands transformed raw ingredients into meals fit for masters who never thanked the cooks nor considered the labor behind each dish. Cook Mary ruled this realm with wooden spoon and sharp tongue, a woman of 60 years who'd spent 4 decades feeding the Cobb family and their guests, watching generations of white children grow fat on food prepared by black hands that never got enough to eat themselves. Lucy entered this world on a Monday morning in late summer, the heat already oppressive, though the sun had barely cleared the horizon. Cook Mary looked her over with eyes that missed nothing, taking in Lucy's still gaunt frame, the way she moved careful like her body remembered pain, the hardness in her gaze that spoke of suffering endured and vengeance brewing. "You the girl from the cage," Mary said. It wasn't a question. Everyone on Magnolia Grove knew Lucy's story by now, whispered it in quarters and fields, used it as warning and inspiration in equal measure. "Master Cobb says you here to help me. That true, or you here to cause trouble?" "I'm here to work," Lucy said, keeping her voice neutral. "Learn what you teach me, do what you tell me, stay out of trouble's way." Mary studied her a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "We'll see about that. Kitchen work ain't easy. Hot, endless, and the white folks always complaining no matter how good the food tastes. But it's better than the fields, and you get to eat scraps from Massa's table, which beats cornmeal and salt pork 3 times a day. You want to survive here, you keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your hands busy. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am, I ain't white folks, Mary or Cook, that's all. Now come here and I'll show you the work." The kitchen was separate from the main house, a wooden structure built away from the mansion to prevent fires from spreading. Inside, a massive brick hearth dominated one wall, its fire burning constant to heat water and cook meals. Iron pots hung from hooks, cast iron skillets sat ready on the coals, and long wooden tables held the tools of Cook Mary's trade. Knives sharp enough to split hairs, rolling pins smooth from decades of use, bowls of every size for mixing and preparing. Along the walls, shelves held ingredients, sacks of flour and sugar, jars of preserves, hanging herbs drying in bunches, tins of spices imported from distant lands at great expense. Lucy's eyes cataloged everything, noting where each item was stored, which shelves she could access unsupervised, how often Mary checked inventory. "You start with simple tasks," Mary said, handing Lucy a paring knife and a basket of potatoes. "Peel these, cut them even for boiling. Master Cobb likes his potatoes mashed smooth, no lumps. While you work, I'll tell you the rules. First rule, never eat food meant for the masters without permission. Second rule, never talk back to white folks, even if they lying or being cruel. Third rule, keep the kitchen clean, cleaner than your own quarters, cleaner than church. Master Cobb don't tolerate dirt near his food." Lucy settled into the rhythm of peeling, her hands remembering skills from before the cage. As she worked, she listened to Mary talk about the household's habits, when they took meals, what dishes they preferred, which family members had delicate stomachs or particular aversions. Information she filed away careful as gold coins, knowing that knowledge of the master's routines would be crucial for what she planned. Other enslaved workers came and went through the kitchen. House servants bringing messages from the mistress about dinner preferences, stable boys delivering fresh eggs and milk, field hands hauling firewood and water. Each nodded respectfully to Lucy, some with pity in their eyes for what she'd endured, others with something like awe for the fact she'd survived Blake's cruelty unbroken. Jem visited during the midday meal preparation, ostensibly to deliver vegetables from the garden, but really to check on his sister. Lucy saw the worry in his face and gave him a small smile, the first genuine warmth she'd shown since emerging from the cage. "I'm all right," she told him quietly while Mary was distracted with the roasting meat. "Better than all right. I'm exactly where I need to be." "You planning something?" Jem said, not quite a question. "Something dangerous." "Don't worry about what I'm planning. Just know that soon things gonna change around here. When they do, you stay close to Mama, you hear? Stay in the quarters, keep your head down, and don't get involved no matter what you see or hear." Before Jem could respond, Blake's voice rang out from the yard, drunk and belligerent even at midday. Both siblings tensed at the sound, Jem with fear, Lucy with something colder and more calculating. "Where's that kitchen girl?" Blake shouted. "The uppity one from the cage. I want to see her, make sure she remembering her place." Cook Mary moved to the door, her body language protective. "She's working, Mr. Blake, doing fine work too. No need to disturb her." But Blake pushed past Mary into the kitchen, bringing with him the stink of whiskey and sweat. His eyes, bloodshot and mean, found Lucy at the work table. For a long moment they stared at each other, Blake with drunken bravado masking something that might have been fear, Lucy with absolute stillness that seemed more dangerous than any outward aggression. "You think you won," Blake said, his words slurring slightly. "Surviving the cage, getting yourself this cushy kitchen job. But I'm watching you, girl. One mistake, just one, and I'll have you back in that cage, or worse." Lucy kept her eyes downcast, her voice soft and respectful. "I ain't looking for no trouble, sir. Just trying to work and stay out of your way. See that you do." Blake swayed slightly, steadying himself against the doorframe. 75 days should have broke you. Don't know why it didn't, but I'll figure it out. And when I do..." He left the threat hanging, then turned and stumbled back toward the overseer's quarters. After he left, Mary let out a breath she'd been holding. "That man's gonna get himself hurt one day, drunk as he stays. Or hurt someone else." She looked at Lucy meaningfully. "Just make sure it ain't you who suffers next time." "Yes, ma'am. I mean Mary." But Lucy's mind was already working, calculating. Blake's daily drinking, his routine of visiting the kitchen to intimidate her, the way his hands shook from too much whiskey and not enough food. All of it could be useful. All of it could be turned against him. That night, Lucy met with Aunt Dinah in the old woman's cabin, ostensibly to have her healing wounds checked, but really to discuss the next phase of the plan. "Kitchen work give you access," Dinah said, applying fresh salve to Lucy's worst scars. "But you gotta be patient. Can't just poison Blake right away, too obvious. You need time to establish yourself as trustworthy, time for folks to forget the cage and see you as just another kitchen worker." "How long?" Lucy asked, impatience sharp in her voice. "Months, maybe. Long enough that when Blake starts showing symptoms, nobody thinks to connect it to you. Long enough that his drinking can take the blame for his failing health." Dinah pulled out a small cloth bundle, unwrapping it to reveal dried roots and powdered herbs. "This here's what you need. Foxglove, deadly in large doses, but in tiny amounts it just weakens the heart over time. White snake root, causes trembling, confusion, wasting away. And this," she held up a dark powder, "oleander root, dried and ground fine, tasteless in strong flavors, kills slow if you use just a pinch at a time." Lucy took the bundle with reverent care, understanding the power she now held. "How do I use them without getting caught?" "Mix them into strong-tasting foods. Blake likes his meat spicy, don't he? Pepper and strong seasonings cover bitter flavors. Start with the foxglove. Twice a week, no more. Just enough to make his heart labor. Then add the snake root after a month. That'll explain the shaking in his hands, the confusion. Finally, when he's already weak, that's when you use the oleander. Final blow to a body already failing. And it'll look natural, natural as can be. Doctors will say his heart gave out from drink and hard living. Master Cobb might be suspicious, but suspicious ain't the same as proof. Long as you careful, long as you patient, you'll get away with it. Dinah gripped Lucy's wrist tight. But child, once you start this, you can't stop halfway. Blake's death has to look inevitable, like nature taking its course, you understand? I understand. Lucy met the old woman's eyes. I've been patient 75 days in that cage. I can be patient 75 more while poison does its work. And when Blake finally dies, when he's laid in the ground with everyone thinking it was just his time, that's when I'll know the ancestors kept their promise. That's when I'll know justice was served. Over the following weeks, Lucy settled into kitchen routine with deceptive ease. She proved herself capable and quiet, the kind of worker who didn't need constant supervision, who learned tasks quickly and performed them well. Cook Mary began to trust her, giving her more responsibility, allowing her to work unsupervised during certain hours. And Lucy began her work. Careful, methodical, patient as death itself. When she prepared Blake's meals, he often ate separately from the Cobb family, taking his food at the overseer's quarters. She would add the tiniest pinch of foxglove powder to his spiced meat. Not enough to cause immediate symptoms, just enough to make his heart work harder than it should, wearing it down day by day. Blake noticed nothing at first. Why would he? He felt tired, but he was always tired from drinking and riding the plantation all day. His heart raced sometimes, but he attributed it to anger or exertion. He had no way of knowing that each meal Lucy prepared for him carried his death, ground fine and mixed invisible into his food. A month passed, then 2. Lucy added the white snake root to her arsenal, watching with cold satisfaction as Blake began to show tremors in his hands, as his eyes took on a confused, distant look at odd moments, as he complained of weakness and shortness of breath. The plantation doctor examined him, pronounced his symptoms consistent with excessive drinking, and recommended moderation. Advice Blake ignored. He's fading, Lucy told Aunt Dinah during one of their secret meetings. Slower than I'd like, but it's working. Every day he's weaker, every day closer to the grave. Good, Dinah said. But remember, you got to keep playing the humble servant. Any hint of satisfaction, any sign you taking pleasure in his suffering, and folks will start to wonder. Stay invisible, stay patient. Lucy did just that, wearing a mask of indifference even as she watched Blake decline. She was careful never to be alone with him, never to give him opportunity to accuse her of anything. To all observers, she was simply a kitchen worker, traumatized by her time in the cage, grateful for her current position, no threat to anyone. But beneath that mask, rage still burned. Not the hot, impulsive rage of youth, but something colder and more enduring. The kind of rage that could wait. The kind that would be satisfied with nothing less than complete revenge. The kind that whispered promises in the dark. Blake first, but not Blake alone. Every overseer who'd stood by while she suffered. Every master who'd built wealth on black suffering. Every white face that looked at enslaved people and saw only property. The cage had taught Lucy patience. Now the kitchen was teaching her power. The power of the invisible, the overlooked, the underestimated. The power of hands that prepared food and could just as easily prepare death. The power of a woman who'd survived the worst and emerged not broken, but sharpened into a blade aimed straight at the heart of slavery itself. 3 months after Lucy began her work in the kitchen, Blake collapsed during his morning rounds. They carried him to his quarters, where he lay fevered and shaking, unable to rise. The doctor came again, prescribed rest and abstinence from alcohol, but couldn't explain why Blake's condition continued to deteriorate despite treatment. Lucy heard the news while kneading bread dough and permitted herself the smallest smile. The plan was working. The ancestors were watching. And Blake's days were numbered in weeks now, not months. Soon, very soon, the first payment for 75 days in the cage would be collected in full. Blake lingered in his sickbed for 17 days more. suffering something terrible, as the old folks would say. His body wasting away despite the doctor's ministrations and the prayers of those white folks who thought prayer might save a man who'd spent his life dealing cruelty. But Lucy knew better. The ancestors had marked Blake for death the moment he locked her in that bamboo cage, and all the doctors and prayers in Virginia couldn't undo what the spirits had decreed. During those 17 days, Lucy continued her work in the kitchen with the same quiet efficiency that had earned Cook Mary's trust. She prepared meals for the Cobb family, kneaded bread till her arms ached, scrubbed pots till they gleamed, and maintained the mask of humble servitude that kept suspicion far from her door. But 3 times during those days, she was sent to Blake's quarters with broth and soft foods meant to strengthen him. And 3 times she added the final touches to her work. The first time, she brought chicken broth seasoned with salt and pepper, and a careful measure of oleander root ground so fine it dissolved invisible into the liquid. Blake was barely conscious when she entered his room, his skin gray as old ashes, his breathing labored and wet. He didn't recognize her at first, his eyes glazed with fever and confusion. "Drink this, sir," Lucy said softly, spooning broth between his cracked lips. "Cook Mary made it special to help you get your strength back." Blake swallowed reflexively, too weak to refuse. As the poisoned broth slid down his throat, his eyes suddenly focused on Lucy's face, and recognition dawned. Terror followed, pure animal terror, as if some part of him understood what was happening even if his conscious mind couldn't grasp it. "You!" he gasped, trying to push the spoon away. "You doing this? You poisoning me?" "Hush now," Lucy said, her voice gentle as a mother soothing a child. "You just fevered and confused. The doctor said you might have visions. Drink your broth and rest. That's all you can do now. Rest and wait." She fed him the entire bowl, ignoring his weak attempts to resist. And when she left his quarters, she felt the ancestors walking beside her, approving, vindicated, hungry for the justice that was finally being served. The second time she brought food to Blake was 5 days later. He'd declined further, his body consumed from within by poisons that mimicked natural disease so perfectly that even the doctor from Richmond, summoned at great expense by Master Cobb, couldn't identify the cause. Blake had lost perhaps 30 pounds, his robust frame reduced to skin and bone, his face a skull with eyes that burned with desperate understanding. "Please," he whispered when Lucy entered with more broth. "Please, I know it's you. I know what you're doing. Stop. I'll tell Master Cobb to free you. I'll give you money, You'll do nothing," Lucy said calmly, settling onto a stool beside his bed. "Because you dying, Mr. Blake. Your body giving out from all that whiskey you've been drinking, from the hard life you've been living. That's what the doctor says. That's what everyone believes. And even if you told them different, even if you accused me, who would believe you? A fevered man pointing fingers at a slave girl who brings him food to help him recover? They'd say you lost your mind along with your health." She spooned broth into his mouth, more poison, always more poison, and watched him swallow it down. Tears ran from his eyes, whether from physical pain or spiritual anguish she neither knew nor cared. 75 days, Lucy said quietly. "That's how long you kept me in that cage. 75 days of sun and rain and thorns and hunger. 75 days of torture for the crime of defending a child. You remember that, Mr. Blake? You remember how you smiled while I suffered?" Blake tried to speak, but only managed a wet, rattling cough that brought up blood-flecked phlegm. Lucy wiped his mouth with a cloth, her movements almost tender, a mockery of care that cut deeper than any curse. "I counted every day," she continued, her voice still soft but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Every hour, every moment of pain. And I made a promise to the ancestors who sustained me. I promised them your death. Slow death. Painful death. The kind where you know it's coming but can't stop it, just like I knew suffering was coming every morning in that cage but couldn't escape it." She finished feeding him the poisoned broth and stood to leave. At the door she paused and looked back at the dying man who'd once held such power over her. "You ain't the first overseer to torture slaves, and you won't be the last," Lucy said. "But maybe, just maybe, your death will teach the others something. Teach them that some folks can't be broken. Teach them that cruelty has consequences. Teach them to fear the hands that prepare their food and the hearts that remember every wrong." Blake opened his mouth as if to respond, but all that came out was another rattling cough. Lucy left him there, gasping and dying, and felt no pity, only satisfaction cold as winter rain. The third and final time Lucy brought food to Blake was on the morning of his 17th day of illness. She carried a bowl of gruel, laced with the last of her oleander powder, enough to finish what she'd started, to push his failing body past the point of recovery. The room stank of sickness and death, and Blake lay so still she initially thought he'd already passed. But his eyes opened when she approached, and in them she saw something that gave her pause. Acceptance. He knew he was dying, knew why, knew who. And in that moment, stripped of his power and his health and his cruelty, he was just a man facing judgment. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible. "For the cage, for everything, I was wrong." Lucy considered his apology, turning it over in her mind like a stone examined for hidden value. Was it genuine remorse, or just the fear of a dying man hoping for mercy? Did it matter? "You're sorry because you dying," she said finally. "Not because you sorry for what you'd done. If you'd lived, if you'd recovered, you'd have gone right back to your cruel ways. Men like you don't change. They just get more careful about who they hurt." She fed him the final bowl of poisoned gruel, spooning it into his mouth despite his weak protests. And when the bowl was empty, she set it aside and looked at him with eyes that held no forgiveness, no mercy, no softness at all. "Die knowing this," Lucy said. "Every slave you ever whipped remembers. Every woman you ever violated remembers. Every child you ever terrorized remembers. And when you draw your last breath, you're gonna face all of them on the other side. All their spirits waiting for you in whatever hell awaits men like you. My revenge ends with your death, but theirs goes on forever." She left Blake's quarters for the last time, and 6 hours later, as the sun set bloody and red over Magnolia Grove Plantation, Cyrus Blake died. They said it was his heart giving out, weakened by years of drink and dissolute living. They said he'd wasted away from some mysterious illness the doctors couldn't cure. They said it was God's will, though some of the more superstitious white folks whispered about curses and conjure and the price of cruelty. In the quarters that night, when news of Blake's death spread like wildfire through the cabins, folks reacted with caution mixed with relief. Nobody celebrated openly. That would draw suspicion and punishment. But in the privacy of their hearts, every enslaved soul on Magnolia Grove felt something shift. A weight lifted, a terror removed. Blake had ruled through fear and violence, and his death created a vacuum that changed the very air they breathed. Lucy sat outside her cabin that night, looking up at stars that seemed brighter than they'd been in months. Jem sat beside her, understanding without words that something significant had happened, that his sister had crossed some threshold from which there was no return. "You killed him," Jem said quietly. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I did," Lucy confirmed. No point in lying. Jem knew her too well, had seen the coldness in her eyes, the calculation in her movements. "And I'd do it again. I'd do it 1,000 times if I could. They gonna figure it out? No, they gonna think he died natural. Weak heart, too much whiskey, bad living. The doctor already told Master Cobb as much." She turned to look at her brother, her face serious. "You can't ever speak of this, Jem, not to Mama, not to anyone. This secret dies with me, you understand?" Jem nodded slowly. "I understand, but Lucy..." He hesitated, choosing words careful. "What happens now? Blake's dead, but the plantation's still here. Master Cobb's still here. Slavery's still here. What changes?" It was a good question, a fair question. Blake's death satisfied the personal debt owed for 75 days in the cage, but it didn't change the fundamental reality of bondage. Lucy was still enslaved. They all were. One dead overseer didn't equal freedom. I don't know, Lucy admitted, but something started here. Something the ancestors put in motion when they kept me alive in that cage, when they taught me the old ways of root and poison. Blake was first payment on a debt much larger than just my suffering. Maybe, she paused, thinking, maybe his death shows others that we ain't helpless, that we got power too, if we use it smart. That's dangerous thinking, Jem said, but there was excitement in his voice underneath the fear. The kind of thinking that gets folks killed. I already died in that cage, Lucy said softly. What walks around now is something else, something harder, something that won't rest till the scales balance. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the quarters. Babies crying, adults talking in low voices, someone singing a spiritual that carried pain and hope in equal measure. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called 3 times, and Lucy smiled, recognizing the ancestors' approval. Blake was dead. The first act of vengeance was complete. But the story, oh child, the story was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Because Lucy of the cage had learned something powerful in those 75 days of suffering, that the enslaved weren't as powerless as the masters believed. That knowledge could be a weapon sharper than any whip, that patience and poison could accomplish what open rebellion never could. Master Cobb would hire a new overseer, of course. The plantation would continue operating, but a seed had been planted in the quarters. A seed of possibility, of resistance, of hope that justice might be possible even in bondage's darkest depths. And Lucy? Lucy had tasted revenge and found it sweet, found it satisfying in ways she'd never imagined. The question now wasn't whether she would strike again, but when and how and against whom. The ancestors had marked her for this purpose, and she would fulfill it, no matter the cost. Blake's grave was dug the next morning in the plantation cemetery, far from where enslaved people were buried. As they lowered his coffin into red Virginia clay, Lucy watched from a distance, her face expressionless. But inside, satisfaction burned like coals, warming her in ways the summer sun never could. "Rest in hell," she whispered to the wind. "And when you get there, tell them Lucy sent you. Tell them she's just getting started." 3 weeks after they buried Blake, Master Cobb brought in a new overseer, a man named Thomas Wickham, who came with letters of recommendation from plantations in South Carolina and a reputation for maintaining discipline without excessive cruelty. Wickham was younger than Blake had been, maybe 35 years old, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw, and a manner that was cold rather than hot-tempered. Where Blake had ruled through drunken violence and personal vindictiveness, Wickham approached slavery as a business requiring efficient management. "I don't whip for pleasure," Wickham told Master Cobb during his first day on the plantation, his voice carrying to where Lucy worked in the kitchen garden nearby. "I whip when necessary to maintain order. No more, no less. Excessive cruelty breeds resentment and rebellion. Consistent discipline breeds compliance." Cobb seemed relieved by this philosophy, having grown weary of Blake's excesses and the attention they drew from more progressive-minded neighbors who questioned such brutal methods. "The slaves here know their place," Cobb said, "but there's been some restlessness since Blake died. They need to understand that authority hasn't weakened just because one overseer passed." "They'll understand," Wickham promised. "Give me a month and I'll have this plantation running smoother than it ever has." Lucy listened to this conversation with mixed feelings. Part of her had hoped for another Blake, another cruel drunk she could eliminate with poison and patience, but Wickham represented a different challenge entirely. He was sober, calculating, and from what she'd heard, he actually read books about plantation management and scientific agriculture. Such men were harder to fool, harder to manipulate, harder to kill without raising suspicion. That evening, Wickham called a meeting of all the enslaved people in the yard, the same yard where the bamboo cage had stood, though it had been dismantled after Blake's death. The enslaved gathered warily, remembering similar meetings that had preceded whippings or new work requirements, or the announcement of families being sold apart. Wickham stood on a raised platform, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, taking in every face before him. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly without shouting. "I'm Thomas Wickham, your new overseer," he began. "I know you're wondering what kind of man I am, whether I'll be worse than Blake or better. The answer is neither. I'm fair but firm. Work hard and obey the rules, and you'll have no trouble from me. Shirk your duties or cause problems, and you'll face consequences. Simple as that." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've been told about the incident with the cage, about the girl who spent 75 days in it for attacking Blake. That won't happen under my watch. Not because I'm softer than Blake, but because I don't believe in dramatic punishments. They're inefficient. If someone needs correction, I prefer methods that don't reduce their work capacity for months." Lucy felt dozens of eyes flick toward her, then away. Wickham's gaze found her in the crowd and held for a moment, assessing, calculating, filing away information about the troublesome slave girl he'd been warned about. She met his eyes briefly, then looked down, playing the role of chastened survivor, but her mind was working fast. This man was dangerous precisely because he was intelligent. "One more thing," Wickham said. "I've heard whispers about Blake's death. Some of you think it was natural, some think otherwise. I'm here to tell you that I don't care which it was. The past is past. But going forward, anyone who harms a white person on this plantation, through violence or poison or any other means, will face consequences that make Blake's cage look merciful. I believe in measured response, but I also believe in making examples when necessary. We understand each other?" Silence greeted his words. The threat was clear, the intelligence behind it undeniable. Wickham wasn't like Blake. He couldn't be manipulated by anger or dulled by alcohol. He was a different kind of enemy entirely. After the meeting, as folks dispersed to their cabins, Aunt Dinah pulled Lucy aside. The old woman's face was troubled, her eyes clouded with concern. "That one's dangerous," Dinah whispered. "Smart dangerous. The kind that watches and waits and sees patterns where others see nothing. You need to be careful, child. Very careful." "I know," Lucy said. "He suspects about Blake already, or at least he's considering the possibility. That speech wasn't random. He was warning whoever killed Blake that he's watching." "So what you gonna do?" Lucy was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Nothing. For now, I do nothing. I be the perfect kitchen worker. I give Wickham no reason to pay me attention. I let time pass until he decides I'm no threat, until his vigilance relaxes. Patience worked with Blake. It'll work with Wickham too, just different." But patience proved harder under Wickham's rule than it had been under Blake's. Where Blake had been predictably cruel, Wickham was methodically efficient. He reorganized the plantation's work schedules to maximize productivity, rotated slave assignments to prevent close relationships from forming, and instituted a system of small rewards for good work that made some enslaved people compete against each other for tiny privileges. He was also frighteningly observant. Lucy noticed him watching the kitchen operations, studying the flow of food from preparation to serving, noting who had access to what ingredients. He interviewed Cook Mary extensively about kitchen procedures, asking questions that seemed casual, but Lucy recognized as strategic. Who prepared which meals, how ingredients were stored, whether anyone had access to the master's food unsupervised. "That Wickham asking a lot of questions about the kitchen," Mary told Lucy one afternoon, her voice uneasy. "Asking about you specific. Wanted to know if you'd shown any interest in herbs or medicines, if I'd caught you doing anything strange, if you seemed happy about Blake's death." Lucy's heart quickened, but she kept her face neutral. "What you tell him?" "The truth. That you're a good worker, quiet, do what you're told, never cause problems. Told him you're still recovering from the cage, probably always will be." That seemed to satisfy him, but girl... Mary gripped Lucy's arm. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, don't. That man's too smart. He'll catch you, and when he does, you'll wish Blake's cage was all you had to suffer." "I'm not thinking about doing anything," Lucy lied smoothly. "I learned my lesson. just want to work and survive. But survival under Wickham meant more than just avoiding suspicion. It meant navigating a plantation that was somehow more oppressive, despite being less overtly violent. Wickham didn't use the whip as frequently as Blake, but when he did, it was calculated for maximum effect. He separated troublemakers from their families, sold them south to cotton plantations where conditions were even worse. He rewarded informants among the enslaved, creating networks of distrust that undermined solidarity. Within 2 months, Magnolia Grove was more profitable than it had been in years. Master Cobb praised Wickham's management, gave him bonuses, spoke of him as the finest overseer in Virginia. And the enslaved people, broken not by dramatic cruelty but by systematic erosion of hope, worked harder than ever before with less complaint. Lucy watched this transformation with growing frustration. Blake had been a monster, but at least his monstrosity had united the quarters against him. Wickham was creating something worse. A plantation where some slaves betrayed others for an extra ration of meat, where families were too afraid to speak freely even in their own cabins, where resistance seemed impossible because the enemy was invisible, woven into the very fabric of daily life. "This is worse than Blake," Kessie said one night, her voice barely above a whisper even in the privacy of their cabin. "At least with Blake we knew what we were fighting. This is slow death of a different kind. Death of spirit, death of community, death of hope." "It won't last," Lucy said with more confidence than she felt. "Wickham's smart, but he's still just one man. He can't watch everyone all the time. His system depends on some of us betraying others, but if we figure out who the informants are..." "Then what?" Kessie interrupted. "You kill them too? How many people you planning to poison, child? How long before you make a mistake and Wickham catches you? I'm proud you got revenge on Blake, but I'm also terrified of what you becoming. The ancestors put something in you during those 75 days, but I ain't sure it was something good." Lucy wanted to argue, wanted to defend her actions and her plans, but looking at her mama's worn face, she couldn't find the words. Because maybe Kessie was right. Maybe the cage had broken something in Lucy after all. Not her spirit, but her humanity. Maybe the woman who'd emerged from that bamboo prison wasn't just hardened, but hollowed, filled up with rage and vengeance until there was room for little else. A month passed, then 2. Lucy worked in the kitchen with impeccable behavior, never giving Wickham cause for suspicion. She helped cook Mary prepare meals, scrubbed floors until they shone, kept her eyes down and her mouth shut. The perfect slave, indistinguishable from dozens of others. But at night, in the privacy of darkness, she met with Aunt Dinah and discussed possibilities. Not immediate action. Wickham was too vigilant for that. But long-term planning. Which masters on neighboring plantations might be vulnerable. How information about resistance could be passed through the underground networks of enslaved people who visited different properties. Whether the time was approaching when small acts of individual revenge might coalesce into something larger. "The world's changing," Dinah told Lucy during one of these meetings. "I hear things from folks passing through. Abolitionists in the North getting louder. Some states already freed their slaves. There's talk of war coming. War between North and South over slavery itself. Maybe..." The old woman's eyes grew distant. "Maybe your revenge on Blake was just the beginning. Maybe the ancestors preparing you for something bigger when the time comes." "And if no war comes?" Lucy asked. "If slavery goes on forever?" "It won't," Dinah said with absolute certainty. "Nothing goes on forever, child. Not even bondage. The question is whether you're gonna be part of bringing it down, or whether you're gonna burn yourself up with hate before that day arrives." Lucy had no answer to that. She only knew that the fire inside her, lit in the cage fed by Blake's death, still burned hot and hungry. Wickham might be smarter than Blake, might be harder to kill, but he was still a white man profiting from black suffering. Still an overseer, still an enemy, still marked in Lucy's mind for eventual justice. She just had to wait for the right moment, had to be patient, as the ancestors had taught her, had to trust that opportunity would come, as it always did for those willing to watch and wait and act when the time was right. 3 months after Wickham's arrival, something happened that changed the game entirely. A slave from a neighboring plantation arrived at Magnolia Grove with a message for Wickham. A message that, through the quarter's invisible network of gossip and eavesdropping, reached Lucy's ears within hours. There had been a poisoning at Riverside Plantation, 10 miles south. An overseer had died under mysterious circumstances similar to Blake's decline, and another plantation beyond that had lost a driver to sudden illness that doctors couldn't explain. Someone was teaching enslaved people how to kill their masters with poison. Someone was spreading knowledge of roots and herbs and deadly preparations. Wickham, upon hearing this news, immediately instituted new security measures. All herbs and ingredients in the kitchen were inventoried daily. No one could handle food unsupervised. Random searches of slave cabins looking for suspicious roots or powders. And most significantly, he began investigating whether there was any connection between the various poisonings, whether a pattern existed, whether certain slaves had access to all the plantations where deaths occurred. His investigation led him inevitably to question Aunt Dinah. As the quarter's known conjure woman, she was the obvious suspect for possessing knowledge of poisonous plants. And if Dinah was involved, then who else had she taught? Who else had access to the kitchen where Blake had taken his final meals? Lucy realized with growing dread that Wickham was circling closer to the truth. Not because he had evidence, he didn't, but because his methodical intelligence was connecting dots that Blake's drunken rage never would have noticed. The net was tightening, and unless something changed soon, both Dinah and Lucy would find themselves facing consequences that would make the bamboo cage look merciful by comparison. Wickham came for Aunt Dinah on a Tuesday morning when the dew still hung heavy on the cotton plants and the quarters was just stirring awake. He brought 2 other overseers with him and Master Cobb himself, a show of force that told everyone this was serious business, not some routine plantation matter. They dragged the old woman from her cabin while folks watched helpless, knowing that any interference would bring swift and terrible punishment. "We need to ask you some questions," Wickham said, his voice calm but his eyes hard as flint. "About herbs, about medicines, about things you might have taught others." Dinah went with dignity, her head held high despite her 70 years and the arthritis that made her joints crack with every step. Lucy watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart pounding fierce against her ribs, knowing this was the moment she'd feared, the moment when Wickham's intelligence finally caught up with her actions. They took Dinah to the overseer's office, that small building near the big house where Blake used to drink himself stupid, and where Wickham now kept his meticulous records. Through the quarter's invisible network of communication, house servants who overheard conversations, field hands who passed beneath windows, children who moved unnoticed through adult spaces, word spread about what was happening inside. Wickham questioned Dinah for hours, asked her about every root and herb she knew, every remedy she'd ever made, every person she'd ever treated or taught. He was patient, methodical, never raising his voice or making threats, just asking questions in that cold, calculating way that was somehow more frightening than Blake's drunken rages had been. "I'm a healer," Dinah told him, her voice steady, though Lucy learned later her hands had trembled. "Been healing folks on this plantation for 40 years. Master Cobb's own mama, God rest her soul, trusted me when she took sick. I use what God put in the earth to ease suffering. That's all I ever done. But some plants ease suffering by causing death," Wickham said. "Foxglove, oleander, white snake root. You know these plants, don't you? You know what they can do? I know them. Any healer worth her salt knows them. We use foxglove for heart troubles in tiny doses too small to harm. We avoid oleander because it's too dangerous even to handle. White snake root," she paused. "We teach folks not to let their cows eat it because it poisons the milk. But knowing about poison plants don't make someone a poisoner, Mr. Wickham. Makes them smart enough not to use them wrong." Wickham studied her face, looking for deception, for the telltale signs of lying that his experience had taught him to recognize. But Dinah had lived 7 decades in bondage, had learned to school her features, to show nothing she didn't want seen. Her face was a mask of elderly innocence, concerned only with healing and helping, as far from a murderer as could be imagined. "Did you know Cyrus Blake was poisoned?" Wickham asked suddenly, changing tactics. I heard he died from bad health. Too much drinking, doctor said. Weak heart finally gave out. That's what the doctor said. But I've been reviewing plantation records from across Virginia, talking to other overseers. There's been a pattern lately. White men dying mysteriously on plantations where they'd been particularly cruel. Always the same symptoms. Weakness, confusion, wasting away. Always attributed to natural causes. But the timing's suspicious, don't you think? Dinah met his eyes without flinching. White folks die same as black folks, Mr. Wickham. Sometimes from illness, sometimes from their own bad habits. Blake drank heavy, everyone knew that. Man who poisons himself with whiskey every day don't need no help dying young. It was a good answer, deflecting suspicion while stating facts that couldn't be disputed. Wickham seemed frustrated by her composure, by his inability to shake her testimony or trap her in contradiction. He tried different approaches, threats of whipping, promises of better treatment if she cooperated, suggestions that someone had implicated her in Blake's death. But Dinah held firm, never wavering from her story. She was a healer who knew plants, nothing more. Finally, after 6 hours of questioning, Wickham let her go. But Lucy, watching Dinah emerge from the office with sunken eyes and trembling hands, knew this wasn't over. Wickham was too smart to give up so easily. He was building a case, gathering information, waiting for someone to make a mistake. He suspects everything but can prove nothing, Dinah told Lucy that night when they met in secret behind the quarter's praise house. He knows someone poisoned Blake, probably knows or suspects it was you. But knowing and proving are different things, and he's too careful to accuse without evidence. What do we do? Lucy asked, fear coiling in her belly for the first time since emerging from the cage. Not fear of death, she'd made peace with dying, but fear of failing, of being stopped before the work was complete, of letting the ancestors down after they'd invested so much in her survival and training. We wait, Dinah said. We be more careful than ever. We give him nothing to find, and if he keeps pushing... The old woman's eyes grew hard. We might need to consider whether Virginia's getting too dangerous for the work we're doing. What you mean? I mean there are places further south where the need is greater, and the watching less intense. Places where enslaved folks are organizing, learning to resist in ways both small and large. Places where someone with your skills and your hatred and your willingness to do what others won't. Places where you could do more damage than just killing one overseer on one plantation. Lucy had never considered leaving Magnolia Grove. This was the only home she'd known since the slave ship brought her mama from Africa. Her mother was here, Jem was here. Her whole world existed within these boundaries. But listening to Dinah talk about a larger struggle, about networks of resistance spanning multiple plantations and states, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe Blake's death wasn't meant to be an ending. Maybe it was a beginning. The first chapter in a longer story about fighting back, about spreading knowledge of resistance, about teaching the enslaved that they weren't powerless, even in bondage's darkest depths. While Lucy and Dinah talked, Wickham was conducting his own nighttime investigation. He searched the quarter's cabins while their occupants slept, looking for suspicious roots or powders, for anything that might confirm his suspicions. He found bundles of herbs in several cabins: feverfew, chamomile, yarrow, the common remedies enslaved people used for everyday ailments. Nothing obviously poisonous, nothing that couldn't be explained as ordinary medicine. But in Dinah's cabin, hidden beneath a loose floorboard that Wickham's careful probing discovered, he found a cloth bundle. Inside, dried roots carefully labeled in scratches that might have been African symbols or might have been meaningless marks. Wickham couldn't identify most of them, but one root he recognized: oleander, dried and powdered, deadly as sin. He left the bundle where he found it, replacing the floorboard carefully so Dinah wouldn't know her hiding place had been discovered. Evidence, finally. Not enough to convict in a court of law, perhaps, but enough to justify action on a plantation where the master's word was final and absolute. The next morning, Wickham went to Master Cobb with his findings. They met in Cobb's study, door closed against eavesdropping servants, and Wickham laid out his case. The pattern of deaths across Virginia plantations, Dinah's knowledge of poisonous plants, the oleander found hidden in her cabin, the timing of Blake's death following Lucy's 75 days in the cage. You're saying the old conjure woman and the kitchen girl conspired to murder my overseer? Cobb said, incredulous. That's a serious accusation, Thomas. It's the only explanation that fits the facts, Wickham insisted. Blake tortured Lucy. She wanted revenge. Dinah had the knowledge and the means. Together they poisoned him slowly over months, making it look like natural illness. And I believe they're connected to similar poisonings on other plantations. That there's a network teaching enslaved people how to kill their masters with roots and herbs. Cobb was silent for a long moment, considering. The accusation was explosive. If true, it meant his plantation harbored not just one murderer, but possibly a cell of organized resistance. If false, it meant condemning innocent slaves based on circumstantial evidence, which might cause unrest in the quarters and damage his reputation as a fair master. What do you propose? Cobb asked finally. We can't prove murder in a way that would satisfy a court, Wickham admitted. But we don't need courts. This is a plantation matter. I propose we sell both women south, separate them, send them to different cotton plantations in Mississippi or Alabama where they'll be watched close and worked hard. Break up whatever network they're part of. Make an example that warns others against following their path. And if you're wrong, if they're innocent? Wickham shrugged. Then we've sold 2 slaves who might have caused trouble anyway. The old woman's past her prime for field work. The girl's shown herself rebellious. Either way, Magnolia Grove is safer without them. It was cold calculus, the mathematics of slavery reduced to risk assessment and property management. Cobb, despite his discomfort, couldn't argue with the logic. Better to err on the side of caution than risk more deaths, more poisonings, more enslaved people getting ideas about resistance. Very well, Cobb said. But we do this quiet. Don't want other plantations thinking we can't control our own property. Arrange the sale through that trader in Richmond. Johnson, the one who handles difficult cases. Have them separated and sold to different buyers, far apart. And Thomas. He fixed Wickham with a serious look. If you're wrong about this, if we're punishing innocent slaves, that stain is on your soul, not mine. I'm not wrong, Wickham said with confidence he almost felt. But even if I am, removing potential troublemakers is sound management. Blake's dead. Other overseers are dying across Virginia. Someone's teaching resistance, and it needs to stop before it spreads further. The decision made, Wickham began arrangements for the sale. He contacted the Richmond slave trader, described the 2 women and the circumstances, negotiated prices that reflected their status as potential troublemakers, lower than healthy, compliant slaves would fetch, but still profitable enough to satisfy Cobb's economic interests. In the quarters, as rumors of the impending sale began to circulate through invisible channels of communication, panic set in. Selling slaves was common enough, but selling them south, to the cotton kingdoms where labor was brutal and life expectancy short, was tantamount to a death sentence. Everyone knew folks who'd been sold south and never heard from again. Lucy learned about the sale from Cook Mary, who'd overheard Wickham and Cobb discussing it while serving their breakfast. The news hit her like a physical blow. After everything she'd survived, the cage, the slow revenge on Blake, the careful navigation of Wickham's suspicions, it was all ending not in triumph, but in separation and exile. When? Lucy asked, her voice hollow. Soon. Maybe days. Wickham's moving fast before word spreads and causes unrest in the quarters. He's already contacted the trader. Just waiting on final arrangements. Lucy found her mother that evening, told her what was coming. Kessie wept bitter tears, holding her daughter close, mourning the loss even before it happened. First they take you in the slave ship, Kessie sobbed. Then the cage, now this. Every time I think we survive the worst, something worse comes. Where's the justice? Where's the God who's supposed to care about our suffering? Justice comes slow, Mama, Lucy said, thinking about Blake's death, about the fear she'd seen in his eyes when he understood what she'd done. But it comes. And even if they sell me south, even if I never see you again," she gripped her mother's hands tight, "remember that I got revenge. Remember that I showed them we ain't powerless. Remember that and teach Jem. Teach him to be smart, be patient, be ready for when his moment comes." That night, Lucy met with Aunt Dinah one final time. The old woman's face was resigned but not defeated, her eyes still sharp with the knowledge she'd accumulated over 7 decades of surviving bondage. "This ain't the end you wanted," Dinah said. "But maybe it's the end the ancestors planned. Sometimes the story we're living ain't the one we thought we was writing." "I wanted to do more," Lucy said, frustration and grief warring in her chest. "Wanted to kill more than just Blake. Wanted to hurt them all." "You did enough. You showed one girl could survive torture, learn deadly arts, kill her tormentor, and nearly get away with it. That story's gonna spread, child. Gonna move through the quarters of every plantation from here to Georgia. Gonna inspire others to resist in their own ways. The revolution don't always look like armies and battles. Sometimes it looks like poison in a master's food, like knowledge passed in whispers, like small acts of defiance that add up over time to something masters can't control." They embraced. Conjure woman and her student, 2 generations of resistance meeting in the darkness. And Lucy felt the ancestors' presence thick around them, approving, grieving, promising that the work would continue even when they were separated. The slave trader arrived 3 days later, a man named Augustus Johnson, who made his living buying and selling human flesh, who could look at enslaved people and calculate their value down to the dollar without seeing souls behind the eyes that stared back at him. He came in a wagon with iron chains and locks, accompanied by 2 rough men who carried rifles and clubs and the casual cruelty of those who'd learned to view black suffering as simply part of doing business. Lucy was working in the kitchen when Wickham came for her, his face expressionless as he delivered the news she'd been dreading. "Gather your things. You're being sold. Traders waiting to take you to Richmond for auction." No explanation, no apology, just the cold fact of her life being uprooted again, torn away from everyone she loved, sent into unknown horror because one smart overseer had connected dots that Blake's drunken stupidity never would have seen. "Can I say goodbye?" Lucy asked, her voice barely steady. "To my mama? To my brother?" Wickham hesitated, then nodded curtly. 5 minutes. Make it quick." Lucy found Kessie in the quarters, found Jem working in the garden, gathered them close one final time. The grief was too large for words, too deep for the few minutes they had, but they held each other fierce and whispered the things families whisper when they know they might never meet again in this life. "You be strong," Kessie told Lucy, tears streaming down her face. "You remember who you are, not what they made you, but who you were born to be. Daughter of Africa, marked by the ancestors, chosen for purpose. This ain't the end of your story, baby, just another chapter. Take care of Jem," Lucy said. "Keep him safe, teach him what I taught you about being smart, about being patient, about never letting them break your spirit no matter what they do to your body." Jem couldn't speak, could only sob against his sister's chest while Lucy stroked his hair and made promises she didn't know if she could keep. That she'd survive, that she'd find a way back, that somehow, someday, they'd be together again. When Wickham came to collect her, pulling Lucy away from her family's embrace, the quarters was silent except for weeping. Every enslaved soul on Magnolia Grove had gathered to witness this separation, to bear witness to another family torn apart, to add this grief to the accumulated sorrow that each of them carried like iron chains around their hearts. They loaded Lucy into Johnson's wagon, shackled her wrists and ankles with iron that bit into flesh still scarred from the bamboo cage, and she didn't fight, didn't scream, didn't give Wickham the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She sat straight-backed in that wagon, her eyes fixed on the horizon, and if tears ran down her face, well, even the hardest heart has its breaking point. Aunt Dinah was already in the wagon when Lucy climbed aboard, the old woman's face carved from stone, showing nothing of the fear or sorrow that must have filled her ancient bones. Their eyes met, held for a moment, and in that glance passed understanding, solidarity, the shared knowledge of two resistors caught in the same net. "Where they taking us?" Lucy asked quietly as the wagon lurched into motion. "Richmond for auction," Dinah said. "Then wherever buyers want us. Could be anywhere from Maryland to Louisiana. Cotton plantations mostly, maybe rice fields in the low country. Places where they work folks to death and replace them cheap because there's always more slaves to buy." Master Cobb stood on his porch watching the wagon depart, his face troubled but resolved. He was a man who'd made a difficult decision for what he believed were good reasons: protecting his investment, maintaining order, preventing further poisonings. That it meant destroying families and condemning women to probable death in the Deep South. Well, that was the cost of maintaining slavery, a cost he was willing to pay as long as someone else bore the actual suffering. Wickham stood beside him, satisfaction in his posture. He'd identified a threat and eliminated it, proving his worth as overseer, demonstrating the cold intelligence that made him valuable to plantation owners across Virginia. That he might be wrong, that he was punishing women based on circumstantial evidence and suspicious patterns rather than actual proof, didn't trouble his conscience. Better safe than sorry, better to remove potential troublemakers before they caused real damage. The journey to Richmond took 2 days, traveling rutted roads through Virginia countryside that Lucy knew she'd never see again. They stopped overnight at a way station where Johnson kept slaves awaiting sale, locked in a barn with 24 others, men, women, children, all of them stolen from their homes and families, all moving south toward cotton kingdoms and almost certain death. In that barn, Lucy met others who'd been sold for various infractions. A man who'd tried to run away, a woman who'd struck an overseer, a teenage boy accused of stealing. Each carried their own story of suffering, their own wounds both visible and hidden, their own burning rage at the injustice of bondage. "You the girl from the cage," one woman said, recognition lighting her eyes. "Heard about you. Heard you survived 75 days locked up, then killed the overseer who done it. That true?" Lucy glanced at Aunt Dinah, uncertain how to answer. But the old woman nodded slightly. Permission to tell the truth, or at least part of it. These were folks who'd never see Magnolia Grove, never be questioned by Wickham, never have opportunity to betray her even if they wanted to. "It's true," Lucy confirmed quietly. "Blake put me in that cage for defending my brother. When I got out, I learned root work from a conjure woman. Poisoned his food slow over months till his heart gave out. They suspected but couldn't prove nothing, so they sold me south instead." The barn went silent. Then, slowly, something shifted in the air. Respect, awe, hope. Here was proof that resistance was possible, that the enslaved weren't completely powerless, that even the cruelest overseer could be brought down by patient cunning and deadly knowledge. "Teach us," the woman said urgently. "Before they separate us at auction, teach us what you know. Teach us how to fight back." Lucy looked at Dinah, saw the old woman's slight nod of approval. This was why the ancestors had kept Lucy alive through the cage, had guided her to Dinah's teaching, had given her the strength to survive long enough to spread the knowledge, not just to kill one man, but to plant seeds of resistance that would grow in soil fertilized by centuries of black suffering. So in that barn, over the course of one long night while Johnson and his men slept drunk in the house nearby, Lucy and Dinah taught. They taught about foxglove and oleander, about white snakeroot and pokeweed, about which mushrooms killed and which merely sickened. They taught about patience, about working slow and subtle, about making death look natural. They taught about the old ways brought from Africa, about conjure and root work, about calling on ancestors for strength and guidance. And they taught something more important than specific plants or techniques. They taught that the enslaved had power, that knowledge was a weapon sharper than any whip, that even in bondage's darkest depths, there were ways to resist, to fight back, to make masters pay for their cruelty. "Remember everything," Lucy told the gathered slaves, her voice intense in the darkness. "Remember and teach others. Pass this knowledge like fire from hand to hand, cabin to cabin, plantation to plantation. Every overseer who dies from mysterious illness, every master who wastes away despite doctors' care, that's us fighting back. That's resistance. That's justice served cold and patient and deadly. When morning came and Johnson arrived to load them for the final journey to Richmond, the slaves in that barn had been transformed. They still wore chains, still faced auction and probable death in cotton fields. But they carried something new: hope, purpose, the understanding that they weren't helpless victims, but potential warriors in a war that would be fought not with armies, but with poison and patience, and the accumulated rage of millions who'd suffered too long in silence. At the Richmond auction block, Lucy and Dinah were separated as Wickham had arranged. Different buyers, different destinations, different fates. Lucy was purchased by a cotton planter from Mississippi, a hard-faced man named Thornton, who needed field hands for his expanding operation and didn't care about the rumors that this girl was trouble. Figured he could break any spirit with enough whip and sun. Dinah went to a rice plantation in South Carolina, bought by a widow who needed an experienced hand to manage household healing since the plantation's old conjure woman had recently died. Better fate than most, perhaps, though still bondage, still separation from everything familiar. As they were led away to different wagons, Lucy and Dinah's eyes met one last time. No words were spoken, couldn't be with buyers and traders listening. But understanding passed between them deeper than language. The work would continue, the knowledge would spread. What they'd started at Magnolia Grove, what Lucy had begun with Blake's death, wouldn't end just because they'd been separated. The revolution, slow and subtle as poison, would spread through the quarters of 1,000 plantations, would move like ghost stories and healing remedies, passed from conjure woman to apprentice, from angry slave to desperate rebel, from one generation to the next, would accumulate power like interest on a debt too long unpaid, until the day, distant but coming, inevitable as judgment, when the bill would finally come due. Lucy rode south in Thornton's wagon, her wrists still shackled, her body exhausted, her heart heavy with grief for everything lost. But her eyes, those eyes that had seen the Middle Passage in visions, that had stared down Blake as he died, that had witnessed the ancestors walking among the living, those eyes looked forward, not back. Mississippi waited. Cotton fields stretched to horizons she'd never seen. New overseers to resist, new masters to fight, new opportunities to practice what she'd learned and teach what she knew. The cage had tried to break her. Blake's cruelty had tried to destroy her. Wickham's intelligence had managed to exile her. But none of it, had succeeded in extinguishing the fire that burned in her soul. She was Lucy of the cage, Lucy the poisoner. Lucy who survived 75 days of torture and emerged harder than the bamboo that had held her. And she carried within her the accumulated rage of every enslaved person who'd ever suffered, the knowledge of deadly roots passed down from Africa, and the promise of vengeance yet to be fully satisfied. "This ain't the end," she whispered to herself as Virginia disappeared behind her, and the deep South opened up ahead. This is just the beginning. Blake was first blood, but there's more coming. More death for masters, more justice for slaves, more resistance until the whole cursed system of bondage comes crashing down. Somewhere in the spirit world, the ancestors heard her vow and smiled. The cage had been her crucible. Blake's death had been her initiation. But the real work, the work of spreading resistance, of teaching others to fight back, of slowly poisoning slavery itself from within, that work was only just beginning. And Lucy, daughter of Africa, survivor of the Middle Passage's legacy, marked by prophecy and tempered in suffering, was ready for it. Ready to become not just a killer of one cruel overseer, but a teacher of resistance, a spreader of deadly knowledge, a weapon aimed at the very heart of the system that had tried so hard to break her spirit. The wagon rolled on toward Mississippi, carrying Lucy toward a future she couldn't see but felt approaching like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. She didn't know what awaited her in those cotton fields. Didn't know if she'd survive the brutal labor, the violent overseers, the killing heat of deep South summers. Didn't know if she'd ever see her mama or Jem or Virginia again. But she knew this. Wherever she landed, whatever plantation claimed her labor, whoever dared to treat her with Blake's cruelty, they would learn what Magnolia Grove had learned. They would discover that some spirits can't be caged, some knowledge can't be unlearned, some debts can't be escaped. They would learn, as Blake had learned in his final agonizing days, that vengeance deferred is not vengeance denied, that patience is its own weapon, that the hands that prepare your food might also prepare your death. And by the time they understood, it would already be too late. Mississippi heat hit Lucy like a fist when Thornton's wagon crossed into the state. Thick, wet heat that made breathing feel like drowning, that turned air itself into something heavy you had to push through just to move. The journey from Richmond had taken near 2 weeks, traveling roads that got worse the further south they went, passing through country where slavery was the foundation of everything, where white folks built fortunes on black suffering and called it progress. Thornton Plantation sprawled across bottomlands near the Yazoo River. 2,000 acres of cotton fields worked by 300 enslaved souls under conditions that made Virginia bondage seem almost gentle by comparison. The big house was smaller than Cobb's. Thornton had invested his money in land and slaves rather than architecture. But the quarters were worse, just rough shacks thrown together quick with gaps in the walls and roofs that barely kept out rain. The overseer here was a man named Silas Crow, tall and lean as a whip itself, with eyes like chips of green glass and a reputation for breaking spirits through systematic cruelty that made Blake's random violence look almost merciful. Where Blake had been a drunk who hurt folks when anger took him, Crow was sober and calculating, a man who studied how to inflict maximum suffering with minimum damage to valuable property. "You're the troublemaker from Virginia," Crow said when Lucy was brought before him, looking her over like she was livestock he was considering purchasing. "Thornton bought you cheap because of your reputation. Says you spent 75 days in a cage for attacking an overseer. That true?" "Yes, sir," Lucy said, keeping her eyes down, playing the role of broken slave, though rage still burned hot in her chest. "Well, we don't have cages here," Crow said, circling her slowly. "Don't need them. Got other ways of teaching lessons to uppity niggers who forget their place. Work you 14 hours a day in these fields, sun up to past sunset. Can't see morning, can't see night, as we say. Miss your quota of cotton picked, you get the lash. Talk back, you get the lash. Look at me wrong, you get the lash. Simple system. Effective. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "Good. You start tomorrow, dawn. Get yourself to the quarters, find an empty bunk if there is one. And girl," he grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes, "I heard what happened to Blake. Heard he died mysterious after you got out of that cage. Don't know if you had something to do with it or not, don't much care. But if any white man on this plantation takes sick, if any overseer or master or even a visiting neighbor gets so much as a bellyache, I'm coming for you first. We clear?" "Yes, sir. Clear as day." He released her with a shove and Lucy stumbled toward the quarters, her legs weak from 2 weeks in the wagon, her body exhausted, her heart heavy with knowledge of what awaited. Virginia had been hard, but Mississippi was harder. Crueler climate, more brutal labor. Overseers who'd perfected the art of breaking spirits without killing bodies because dead slaves couldn't pick cotton. The quarters at Thornton Plantation held a different kind of suffering than Magnolia Grove. These folks were worked to the bone, pushed beyond what human bodies should endure, replaced when they died or collapsed by fresh slaves bought from the auction blocks that fed the Cotton Kingdom's endless appetite for black labor. Life expectancy for field hands here was maybe 10 years. Folks died young from overwork, from disease, from accidents, from the slow grinding destruction of bodies used up and discarded. Lucy found space in a cabin with 5 other women, all of them hollow-eyed and gaunt, their hands calloused from cotton bowls, their backs scarred from regular whippings. They looked at her with mixture of curiosity and wariness. New blood brought change, and change on a plantation was usually bad. "You the one from Virginia," an older woman named Beulah said, not a question. "Word travels even down here. You the girl who survived the cage." "I survived," Lucy confirmed quietly. "Don't know yet if that was blessing or curse." "Curse," another woman said bitterly. "Everything about this place is cursed. You'll see come morning when Crow drives you to the fields. You'll wish you died in that cage up in Virginia. But Lucy didn't wish that. Even when dawn came brutal and early. Even when Crow marched them to fields that stretched endless under a sun that beat down merciless from a sky too bright to look at. Even when she was handed a cotton sack and told her quota, 100 pounds picked by sunset or face 20 lashes, and realized that her hands, still recovering from cage wounds, would bleed long before day's end. The work was hell itself made manifest, bending over cotton plants hour after hour, fingers moving fast through bowls, thorns and sharp edges cutting skin, back screaming from the constant stooping, sun cooking exposed flesh, thirst making throat raw as sandpaper. Other slaves worked alongside her, some singing work songs to pass the time, others silent with grim endurance, all of them caught in bondage's machinery that ground souls to dust. Lucy picked cotton till her fingers bled, till her back felt broken, till sweat soaked through her dress and she thought she might collapse from heat and exhaustion. But she kept going, driven by the same stubbornness that had sustained her through 75 days in the cage, the same refusal to break that had let her survive Blake's cruelty. By sunset, she'd picked 87 pounds, short of quota by 13. Crow called her out of the line of slaves returning to quarters, his face showing neither anger nor pleasure, just cold efficiency. "Short quota first day," he said. "That's 10 lashes, stripped down." Lucy removed her dress with shaking hands, exposing her scarred back to Mississippi twilight, and bent over the whipping post they kept at field's edge for just such occasions. The lash fell like fire, 1, 2, 3, opening old scars and creating new ones, reminding her body of pain it had almost forgotten. She bit her lip bloody to keep from screaming, refusing to give Crow satisfaction, and when he finished she straightened up, met his eyes with expressions so cold and dead that even he looked momentarily unsettled. "Tomorrow you'll make quota," Crow said, "or the lashes double. That's how we do things here." Lucy dressed and walked back to quarters with blood running down her back, and the other women cleaned her wounds with water and rags while whispering sympathetically. But Lucy's mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, remembering what Aunt Dinah had taught her about patience and poison, and the long game of resistance. Mississippi had different plants than Virginia, but the Delta was rich with deadly growing things if you knew where to look. Pokeweed grew wild along field edges. Water hemlock flourished in damp areas near the river. Jimson weed, devil's trumpet some called it, could be found in disturbed soil, its seeds deadly as oleander if prepared right. Lucy began learning the landscape, memorizing where dangerous plants grew, noting which ones might be harvested without drawing attention. She worked her quota every day after that first whipping, pushing her body past its limits, because she needed to appear compliant, needed Crow and Thornton to stop watching her so close, needed time and space to work. Weeks passed, then months. Lucy adapted to Mississippi's brutal rhythm, up before dawn, fields till dark, collapse into exhausted sleep. Repeat. Her body hardened from the labor, muscles growing strong despite inadequate food, hands developing calluses thick enough to pick cotton without constant bleeding. And she watched, learned, planned. There was no conjure woman at Thornton Plantation. The last one had died 2 years prior, and her knowledge had died with her. But Lucy carried Dinah's teaching in her memory, and she began sharing it careful and selective with the few women she learned to trust. Not openly, not in ways that would draw overseer attention, just whispered conversations in darkness, shared knowledge about which plants healed and which harmed, lessons in patience and subtlety. "Why you teaching us this?" Beulah asked one night after Lucy had explained the properties of pokeweed root. "What good does knowing about poison do us when we can't get close enough to white folks' food to use it? Because knowledge itself is power," Lucy said, echoing what Dinah had taught her. "Because even if you never use it, knowing you could changes how you see yourself, changes you from helpless victim to someone with options, even if those options are dangerous. And because..." She paused, choosing words careful. "Situations change. Opportunities come. When they do, You want to be ready. The opportunity came sooner than Lucy expected, in the form of a fever that swept through the quarters that autumn. Dozens fell sick with chills and sweating and delirium, and Thornton, worried about losing valuable property, ordered Crow to find someone with healing knowledge to tend the sick. Crow remembered Lucy's reputation from Virginia, remembered that she'd spent time with a conjure woman, and summoned her. Thornton says you know healing. That true? Some, Lucy admitted carefully, learned from an old woman up in Virginia. Not everything, but enough to help with common ailments. Then you're the plantation healer now. Still work the fields, but when folks take sick, you treat them. Keep my property alive and healthy, and you'll be treated well. Let them die and you'll face consequences, understand? Yes, sir. It was the opportunity Lucy had been waiting for. Access to herbs and roots, legitimate reason to gather plants, authority to move around the plantation with less supervision. She worked the sick with genuine skill, using what Dinah taught her about healing, saving lives because dead slaves helped no one, and because she needed to establish herself as valuable. But she also gathered other plants, the deadly ones, the ones that could kill slow and subtle when mixed into food or water, that could weaken hearts and confuse minds and waste bodies till death came looking natural. She hid them careful in her healing supplies, dried and powdered and ready for when the moment came. Crow began to trust her, to rely on her healing skills, to give her freedoms that other slaves didn't have. And Lucy used those freedoms to learn the plantation's patterns. When Crow took meals, where Thornton ate, who prepared the white folks' food, and how it moved from kitchen to table. 6 months after arriving in Mississippi, Lucy had positioned herself perfectly for what came next. She was the trusted healer, the woman who saved lives, the one who moved with relative freedom gathering plants for medicine. No one suspected that the same hands that healed enslaved people were preparing poisons for their masters. No one except maybe Beulah, who watched Lucy work and saw something familiar in her eyes. The same cold calculation, the same patient rage, the same determination to make oppressors pay that had driven her to kill Blake back in Virginia. "You planning something?" Beulah said one night. Not quite a question. "I'm always planning something," Lucy said. "Question is whether I'll live long enough to see it through, or whether Mississippi kills me first like it kills everyone else who ends up here. And if you do see it through, if you succeed in whatever you're planning, what changes? We still slaves, still suffering. One dead overseer or master don't free us." Lucy smiled that cold smile that had frightened her mama back in Virginia. One dead overseer don't free us, but one dead overseer teaches others to fear, teaches them that cruelty has consequences. And if enough overseers die, if enough masters take sick mysterious, if enough plantations learn that the enslaved ain't powerless, maybe then something changes. Maybe then the whole system starts to crack. It was a long game Lucy was playing, a dangerous game. A game that might end with her death, might end with more suffering for those around her, might accomplish nothing except satisfying her own need for revenge. But it was the only game she knew how to play, the only weapon she possessed, and she would use it until the day she died or the day slavery died, whichever came first. Winter came to Mississippi, not the harsh cold of Virginia, but a damp, penetrating chill that settled in bones and made cotton picking even more miserable because fingers went numb and fumbled with the bowls. Lucy had survived 8 months at Thornton Plantation by then. 8 months of brutal labor and careful planning, 8 months of building trust while hiding her true intentions behind a mask of dutiful servitude. Silas Crow had grown comfortable with Lucy as the plantation healer. She'd saved a dozen slaves from fever, treated countless minor injuries, and proved herself valuable enough that he stopped watching her so close. This was exactly what Lucy had waited for, the moment when vigilance relaxed, when she became invisible through usefulness, when opportunity would finally present itself. The opportunity came through a woman named Pearl who worked in Thornton's kitchen, an older slave with kind eyes and trembling hands, worn down by decades of bondage but still holding on to scraps of dignity. Pearl developed painful arthritis in her fingers that winter, making it hard for her to work, and she came to Lucy seeking relief. "Can you help me?" Pearl asked, showing Lucy her swollen, twisted joints. "The pain's so bad I can barely hold a knife no more. Master Thornton getting impatient with how slow I move, threatening to replace me with younger hands." Lucy examined Pearl's hands with practiced eye, recognizing advanced arthritis that would only worsen with time. She mixed a poultice of willow bark and comfrey root that would ease inflammation, showed Pearl exercises to maintain flexibility, and spoke with careful casualness. "You work in the big house kitchen?" "Yes'm, 30 years now. Used to be I could cook anything, move fast as lightning. Now," Pearl's voice broke, "now I'm just waiting for Master Thornton to decide I ain't useful no more. Sell me or work me to death in the fields." "Don't think like that," Lucy said gently, though her mind was calculating possibilities. "I'll make sure you stay useful. Give you medicines to keep the pain manageable. Teach you ways to work smarter instead of harder. Master Thornton won't have no reason to replace you." Pearl's gratitude was genuine and complete. Over the following weeks, Lucy treated her regularly, providing poultices and teas that truly helped with the arthritis, building a relationship of trust and dependence. And she listened carefully as Pearl talked about her work, about how she prepared Master Thornton's meals, about his preferences for heavy meat and rich gravies, about how he ate alone most evenings in his study while working on plantation accounts. "Must be lonely," Lucy said during one treatment session. "Cooking for just one man." "Sometimes I think so," Pearl agreed. "But Master Thornton, he don't like company when he's working. Says he needs quiet to concentrate on his numbers and such. So I prepare his evening meal, bring it to his study on a tray, and that's that. He eat, I collect the dishes later, and we both go about our business." "And Crow, the overseer, he eat with Master Thornton?" "No'm. Crow got his own cabin, takes his meals there. Sometimes I prepare for him too, but mostly he fend for himself or eat with the other overseers at the quarters kitchen." Lucy filed this information away careful as gold. Thornton ate alone. Pearl brought his food. There was a moment of vulnerability there, a crack in the armor of power, an opportunity for someone patient enough to wait for it. But Lucy was cautious. Virginia had taught her that intelligence could be as dangerous as any whip. She couldn't just poison Thornton the way she'd poisoned Blake. Wickham's investigation had proven that patterns drew attention, that mysterious deaths on multiple plantations would eventually connect. She needed something different, something that wouldn't immediately suggest poison, something that would look like accident or natural cause without raising suspicion. The answer came through her healing work. An enslaved man named Joseph was brought to Lucy suffering from mushroom poisoning. He'd eaten wild mushrooms picked from the woods, mistaking deadly ones for edible varieties. Lucy treated him with what remedies she knew. But the man died anyway, his body racked by convulsions and organ failure that modern medicine couldn't have stopped, let alone the crude herbs available to enslaved healers. Watching Joseph die, Lucy understood. Mushroom poisoning was known, documented, accepted as tragic accident when folks mistook one variety for another. And Mississippi woods were full of deadly mushrooms if you knew where to look. Death caps that destroyed the liver, destroying angels whose beautiful white caps hid lethal toxins. Over the next month, Lucy studied mushrooms with the same intensity she'd studied poisonous roots back in Virginia. She learned to identify the deadly species, learned which ones looked similar enough to edible varieties that confusion was plausible, learned how to prepare them so their toxins would be most potent. She also cultivated her relationship with Pearl, treating the woman's arthritis faithfully, listening to her stories, gradually introducing the idea that Lucy might help in the kitchen sometimes. Just light work, preparing vegetables or kneading bread, nothing that would make Master Thornton suspicious of an outsider handling his food. "I don't know," Pearl said uncertainly when Lucy first suggested it. "Master Thornton particular about his kitchen. Don't like change." "Wouldn't be change," Lucy said smoothly. "Would just be me helping you when your hands hurt too bad. You'd still be in charge, still preparing everything. I'd just be extra hands doing the simple tasks. And if it helps keep you useful, keeps Master Thornton from replacing you, Ain't that worth considering? Pearl's fear of being discarded overcame her caution. She spoke to Crow, who spoke to Thornton, and permission was granted for Lucy to assist in the kitchen during Pearl's worst pain days. It was presented as kindness, helping an aging slave maintain her usefulness. But it gave Lucy exactly what she needed: access. The first few times Lucy worked in the kitchen, she did nothing suspicious. Just helped Pearl with basic tasks, proved herself useful and trustworthy. Let Thornton grow accustomed to seeing her there. She was invisible again, the way she'd been invisible as Blake's poisoner. The way she'd learned to be invisible through the whole machinery of slavery. Spring came to Mississippi with oppressive heat and humidity that made breathing difficult and turned the cotton fields into steam baths. Lucy had been at Thornton Plantation for a full year now, had survived conditions that killed many, had positioned herself carefully for what she planned. On a Tuesday evening in late April, when Pearl's arthritis was particularly bad and Lucy was working in the kitchen preparing vegetables for Thornton's dinner, opportunity finally arrived. Master Thornton wanted mushrooms with his venison. Rich, creamy mushrooms in butter and wine, one of his favorite dishes. Pearl usually prepared such meals herself, but her hands were too swollen that day, fingers too stiff to properly clean and slice the delicate fungi. "You'll have to do it," she told Lucy apologetically. "I can barely hold the knife today, just prepare them like I show you. Slice thin, saute in butter, add wine and cream." Master Thornton's very particular about his mushrooms. Lucy's heart raced, but her hands stayed steady. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, had dried deadly mushrooms collected from the woods and hidden them in her healing supplies, had practiced until she could work with them safely, knowing that touching certain varieties could poison through skin contact alone. "Where are the mushrooms?" Lucy asked, keeping her voice casual. "In the root cellar. Good fresh ones we bought from a forager this morning. Go fetch them and I'll talk you through the preparation." Lucy went to the root cellar, found the basket of edible mushrooms Pearl mentioned. Beautiful button mushrooms and chanterelles, perfectly safe. She also retrieved the hidden cache of death caps she'd prepared. Mushrooms that looked similar enough to pass cursory inspection, but carried toxins that would destroy liver and kidneys slowly over days, causing death that would appear natural, that doctors would attribute to organ failure from unknown causes. Back in the kitchen, Lucy prepared 2 batches, one with the safe mushrooms that Pearl was supervising, and a smaller batch with the deadly ones that she worked on while Pearl was distracted with other dinner preparations. The death caps looked so similar once sliced and cooked that even an expert would have difficulty telling them apart. "These look good," Pearl said, glancing at Lucy's work. "Add the butter now, then the wine after they soften. Master Thornton likes them rich and creamy." Lucy prepared the dish exactly as instructed, the deadly mushrooms indistinguishable from safe ones in the finished meal. Her hands didn't shake. Her face showed nothing but concentration. Years of slavery had taught her to hide everything behind a mask, and that skill served her now. When the meal was ready, Pearl arranged it on a silver tray: venison, mushrooms, roasted potatoes, fresh bread, wine, and Lucy watched as the older woman carried it toward Thornton's study. Everything looked perfect, smelled perfect, would taste perfect too, right up until the moment when toxins began their slow destruction of internal organs. "That was good work," Pearl told Lucy when she returned from delivering the meal. "Maybe Master Thornton will let you help regular-like. These old hands ain't what they used to be, and having someone reliable to assist makes things easier." "Happy to help anytime," Lucy said, cleaning up the kitchen with careful efficiency, making sure no trace of the death caps remained, no evidence that could point to deliberate poisoning rather than tragic accident. That night, Lucy lay awake in her cabin, thinking about what she'd done. Unlike with Blake, she felt no satisfaction yet. Mushroom toxins worked slow, symptoms wouldn't appear for perhaps a day or two, and death might take a week. But she felt something else, a grim sense of purpose fulfilled, of promises kept to the ancestors who'd sustained her through the cage and beyond. Thornton had bought her knowing she was trouble, had put her to work in fields that killed most within years, had built his fortune on suffering so vast that individual pain became just numbers in accounting ledgers. He wasn't as personally cruel as Blake, wasn't the type to torture for pleasure, but he was part of the same system, benefited from the same bondage, bore the same guilt. And now he would pay the same price. Slow death from poison prepared by hands he'd never suspect, served by a woman whose suffering he'd never considered, administered by the very system of slavery that had made him wealthy. 3 days later, Thornton took sick, started with stomach pains and nausea, progressed to jaundice as his liver began failing, finally escalated to delirium and organ shutdown. The doctor from Vicksburg was summoned, examined the patient thoroughly, and diagnosed liver disease of unknown origin, perhaps from bad water, perhaps from some infection, impossible to say for certain. "Will he recover?" Crow asked, his face worried because Thornton's death would throw the plantation into uncertainty. "I don't know," the doctor admitted. "The liver is badly damaged. If the underlying cause can be identified and treated, perhaps. But if this is advanced disease," he shook his head gravely, "then I fear the outcome is inevitable." Thornton lingered for 8 days, his condition worsening steadily despite the doctor's treatments. Lucy was called to his sick room several times to assist with healing, the bitter irony of the poisoner tending her victim, and she did what she could to appear concerned, while secretly knowing that no herb or prayer would save him from the toxins destroying his liver. On the 8th day, as spring rain fell soft on Mississippi soil, Master Thornton died. The official cause was listed as acute liver failure, possibly from contaminated food or water. A tragic reminder of how even wealthy plantation owners weren't immune to mysterious illnesses. No one suspected poison. No one connected his death to Lucy's presence in the kitchen that one evening. No one thought to question the mushrooms that had been part of his final healthy meal. The quarters received news of Thornton's death with mixed emotions. Fear of what would happen to the plantation, worry about being sold if Thornton's heirs decided to liquidate assets, but also quiet, unspoken, a sense that justice had been served in ways they didn't fully understand but somehow recognized. Lucy felt the ancestors' approval like warmth in her chest. Blake in Virginia, Thornton in Mississippi, 2 masters down, countless more to go. The revolution was spreading slowly but surely, through whispered knowledge and patient poison, through resistance practiced in shadows and kitchens, through the accumulated rage of millions finally finding outlet. That night, Beulah approached Lucy outside the cabin, her eyes knowing. "You did something. Don't tell me what. Don't want to know specific. But you did something and now Master Thornton's dead. That right?" Lucy met her gaze steadily. "What makes you think I had anything to do with it?" "Because I know you. Know what you carry inside from that cage back in Virginia. Know you ain't the type to forgive or forget." Beulah paused. "Question is, what happens now?" "They'll sell this plantation. Probably split us up, send us to different buyers. Your work here is done. Where you go next?" "Wherever the ancestors guide me," Lucy said. "Wherever the work needs doing. Wherever enslaved folks need to learn that they ain't helpless, that knowledge is power, that patience and poison can accomplish what violence and rebellion never could." "You gonna get caught eventually. Wickham almost caught you in Virginia. Someone else will figure out the pattern." "Maybe," Lucy acknowledged. "Or maybe I'll die old and free, having taught hundreds of others what I know, having started something that outlives me. Either way, I'm content. I survived the cage. I've taken revenge twice now. Whatever comes next, I'm ready for it." Thornton's death threw the plantation into chaos that lasted near 3 months, while lawyers and distant relatives fought over the estate. During that time, Crow maintained operations, but everyone knew change was coming. The plantation would be sold or divided. Slaves would be auctioned off to settle debts. Families that had managed to stay together would be torn apart again. It was the uncertainty that hurt most, the waiting to learn your fate while having no control over it. Lucy used those 3 months well, child. She continued her work as healer, moving through the quarters tending sick and injured, but she also taught, careful teaching, whispered lessons in darkness, knowledge passed like contraband from hand to hand. She taught Beulah and 3 other trusted women about poisonous plants. Which ones killed fast, which ones killed slow, which ones looked innocent enough that their presence could be explained as healing herbs if quarters were searched. "Why you teaching us?" asked a young woman named Sarah, barely 20 but already aged by bondage. "You gonna be sold away soon. What good does this knowledge do us when you ain't here to guide us?" "Because knowledge spreads," Lucy said, her voice intense in the cabin's darkness. "I teach you, you teach others. The work don't stop when I leave, it multiplies. Every plantation that loses an overseer to mysterious illness, every master who dies from unexplained causes, every time the white folks realize they ain't as safe as they thought, that's resistance. That's revolution happening slow and quiet where they can't see it till it's too late." "But it's dangerous," Sarah protested. "They catch any of us with poison, they'll kill us, burn us alive like they did that conjure woman over in Louisiana who got accused of hexing her master." "Living is dangerous," Lucy said flatly. "Breathing is dangerous when you're enslaved. They can kill us anytime they want for any reason or no reason at all. At least this way, if we die fighting back. Die knowing we wasn't helpless victims but warriors in a war most folks don't even know is being fought." She taught them about foxglove hidden among healing herbs, about oleander that looked decorative but carried death in every leaf, about mushrooms that could be mistaken for safe varieties, about slow poisoning versus fast, about patience and planning, and the importance of making deaths look natural. She taught them the lessons Aunt Dinah had taught her, the wisdom passed down from Africa through generations of conjure women and root doctors who'd kept the old knowledge alive even in bondage. And she taught them something more, that they had power, that the system of slavery, for all its violence and oppression, had a weakness. It relied on enslaved people preparing food, tending sick, handling intimate aspects of white folks' lives. That intimacy created vulnerability, and vulnerability created opportunity for those patient enough to wait and smart enough to act careful. Word of Lucy's teaching spread through the invisible networks that connected plantations across Mississippi and beyond. Field hands who visited neighboring estates, slaves hired out to work temporarily elsewhere, preachers who moved between plantations holding forbidden church services, stories about the woman from Virginia who'd survived the cage, who'd killed 2 masters with poison, who taught others her deadly arts. These stories moved like wind through cotton fields, inspiring some, frightening others, planting seeds of possibility in minds that had accepted powerlessness as permanent condition. Not everyone approved. Some of the older enslaved folks thought Lucy was bringing trouble that would fall on innocent heads. "You teaching people to kill white folks," an old man named Isaiah said when he overheard one of Lucy's lessons. "That's gonna get us all killed. They find out what you doing. They gonna punish the whole quarters, whip us all, sell our families, make examples that terrify everyone for generations." "They already punishing us," Lucy shot back. "Already whipping us, already selling our families, already terrorizing us every single day just by keeping us enslaved. What I'm teaching don't make things worse. It gives folks a weapon to fight back with even if they never use it. Just knowing you could poison your master changes how you see yourself, changes you from property to person, from victim to potential warrior." "You're dangerous," Isaiah said, but there was respect in his voice underneath the fear. "You're the kind that either changes the world or burns it down trying." "Maybe both," Lucy said. "Maybe that's what's needed. Burn down the old world so something new can grow from the ashes." The sale finally happened in late summer. Thornton's estate was purchased by a consortium of 3 plantation owners who divided the land and slaves among themselves. Lucy was sold to a man named Colonel James Wade, who owned a smaller plantation 30 miles south, closer to the Louisiana border. Wade was old Virginia aristocracy fallen on hard times, trying to rebuild his fortune through Mississippi cotton, a man who believed in paternalistic slavery, treating his slaves well as long as they remained obedient, punishing harshly any sign of rebellion. Lucy arrived at Wade Plantation with her reputation preceding her. Wade had heard about the troublemaker from Virginia, knew she'd been caged and sold south, suspected she might have had something to do with Thornton's mysterious death, though nothing could be proved. He bought her anyway. She came cheap because of her reputation. And Wade prided himself on breaking difficult slaves, turning troublemakers into compliant workers through combination of strict discipline and calculated kindness. "I know what you are," Wade told Lucy during their first meeting, his voice cultured and cold. "I know your history, but I also believe in redemption, in giving people opportunities to prove themselves. Work hard, cause no trouble, and you'll find I'm a fair master, but cross me." His eyes hardened. "And you'll discover I can be worse than any cage or any overseer you've known." "Yes, sir," Lucy said, playing the role again, the eternal performance of the subjugated pretending submission while plotting resistance. Wade assigned her to field work initially, testing her, watching to see if she'd try to leverage her healing knowledge into easier position. But Lucy picked cotton without complaint, made her quotas, kept her head down and her mouth shut. She was patient, always patient. The cage had taught her that good things came to those who could endure. After 2 months, when Wade was satisfied that Lucy wasn't an immediate threat, he reluctantly allowed her to work as healer again. Too many slaves were falling sick, and he couldn't afford to keep losing property to preventable illness. Lucy accepted the position with outward humility and inner satisfaction. Access again, opportunity again, the pattern repeating. But Lucy was more cautious here than she'd been at Thornton's plantation. Wade was smarter than Thornton, more observant, more suspicious. She couldn't just poison him and expect to escape notice. She needed to build trust over months or years, needed to become invisible through usefulness, needed to wait for the perfect opportunity. In the meantime, she taught, found the women and men she could trust, passed on her knowledge in whispered night lessons, spread the gospel of resistance through poison and patience. Some of Wade's slaves had connections to other plantations, hired out for special jobs, sent to neighboring estates to help with harvests, taken to town on errands. Through these connections, Lucy's teaching spread further. A year passed, then another. Lucy survived Mississippi's brutal summers and damp winters, survived Wade's suspicious oversight, survived the grinding daily horror of bondage. She was 23 years old now, but felt ancient, carrying the weight of so much suffering and death, so much knowledge and rage. But she also carried hope, because the network was growing. Messages came through the invisible grapevine about overseers dying mysteriously on plantations across 3 states, about masters falling sick with symptoms that baffled doctors, about enslaved people learning to fight back in ways that left no evidence, no trail, no clear enemy for white folks to retaliate against. The revolution Lucy had started with Blake's death was spreading like slow fire through dry grass. It wasn't the dramatic uprising that terrified white folks. Wasn't Nat Turner's rebellion with blood and violence. It was quieter, subtler, more insidious. A conjure woman here teaching deadly arts. A kitchen worker there learning about poisonous mushrooms. A field hand somewhere else memorizing which roots killed and which healed. And everywhere the knowledge spreading. We ain't powerless. We can fight back. We can make them pay. One evening, Lucy received a visitor. A traveling preacher named Josiah who moved between plantations holding secret worship services in hush harbors and hidden clearings. But Josiah was more than just a preacher. He was part of a larger network connecting resistors across the South, passing information, coordinating activities, building towards something bigger than individual acts of revenge. "I've been hearing about you," Josiah told Lucy when they met in the woods beyond Wade's quarters. "Hearing about a woman who survived the cage, who knows the old ways of root and poison, who's teaching others to resist. They say you might be the one prophecies spoke of, the one who'd spark the fire that burns down slavery itself." "I'm just trying to survive," Lucy said, "trying to make the masters pay for what they done. If that inspires others, good. But I ain't no prophet, just an angry woman with dangerous knowledge." "Sometimes that's all prophecy needs," Josiah said with a slight smile. "One angry woman with dangerous knowledge can change more than armies with guns." You're building something here, sister. Something that's gonna outlive you. Gonna outlive all of us. Question is, are you ready for what comes next? What comes next? War, Josiah said simply. Maybe not tomorrow or next year, but soon. War between North and South over slavery itself. And when that war comes, folks like you, folks who've been teaching resistance, building networks, preparing for the moment, you're gonna be needed. Gonna be leaders in a fight bigger than poisoning individual masters. Lucy listened to Josiah's words and felt something shift in her chest. She'd been so focused on personal revenge, on killing the men who'd directly hurt her, or who profited from her suffering, that she hadn't fully considered the larger picture. But Josiah was right. Individual acts of resistance were building toward something greater, creating infrastructure that could support larger rebellion when the time came. Tell me more, Lucy said. And through that night, Josiah spoke about the underground networks connecting enslaved people across the South, about abolitionists in the North who were organizing and agitating, about the growing political crisis that was pulling the nation toward rupture, about the role that resistors like Lucy would play when the moment finally arrived. For the first time since emerging from the cage, Lucy felt something beyond rage and revenge. She felt purpose larger than personal vendetta. She felt connected to a movement that stretched back to the first slaves who'd resisted on the first ships, and forward to a future where bondage would finally be broken. The work continued. The teaching spread. The revolution grew. 3 more years passed like slow torture, child. 3 years of picking cotton under Mississippi sun. 3 years of playing the obedient slave while teaching resistance in shadows. 3 years of watching and waiting while the nation moved closer to the war Josiah had predicted. Lucy was 26 now, her body lean and hard from labor, her eyes carrying depths of knowledge and suffering that made even hardened overseers uncomfortable when they looked too long. Colonel Wade had grown to trust her, or at least to trust her usefulness. She'd saved dozens of his slaves from illness, had proven herself reliable in the fields, had given him no obvious cause for concern. But Wade was no fool. He kept Lucy under closer observation than other slaves, intuiting that something dangerous lurked beneath her compliant surface, even if he couldn't identify exactly what. "You're too quiet," Wade told her once, studying her with calculating eyes. "Too careful. Most slaves who've been through what you've been through, the cage, the sales, the hard labor, they break in obvious ways. Become sullen or rebellious or just empty. But you," he paused, "you're something different. Can't quite figure what, but I'm watching you." "Just trying to survive, master," Lucy said, the lie smooth as silk on her tongue. "Just trying to live quiet and stay out of trouble's way." But Lucy was far from quiet in the hidden spaces where Wade couldn't see. She'd built a network of 6 women on Wade Plantation, who she trusted completely. Women she'd taught everything Aunt Dinah taught her and more. Through these women, knowledge spread to neighboring plantations, then to plantations beyond those, creating a web of resistance that stretched across Mississippi and into Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee. Messages moved through this network like blood through veins. Warnings about suspicious overseers, information about which masters were particularly vulnerable, stories of successful poisonings that inspired others to try their own. The enslaved had created an invisible communication system that white folks never saw, passing information through work songs, through symbols scratched on trees, through trusted messengers who moved between plantations. One of Lucy's students, a woman named Hannah, successfully poisoned an overseer who'd raped her repeatedly for 2 years. She used pokeweed root exactly as Lucy taught, making the man's death look like natural illness. When Hannah whispered the news to Lucy, tears streaming down her face, Lucy felt satisfaction deep as any she'd known since Blake died. "You did good," Lucy told her. "You made him pay. You showed yourself and others that we ain't helpless." "But I'm scared," Hannah admitted. "Scared they'll figure it out. Scared they'll hurt my children if they suspect." "Fear is natural," Lucy said. "But you were careful, like I taught you." They got no reason to suspect poison over natural death. And even if they do suspect, they can't prove nothing. Just hold steady, stay quiet, and let the fear pass. Hannah did hold steady, and her overseer's death passed without investigation. Just another white man claimed by mysterious southern illness. But the impact rippled outward. Other enslaved women heard the story, understood that Hannah had struck back against her rapist, saw that justice was possible even in bondage. The seed Lucy had planted with Blake's death 7 years ago was growing into something vast and terrible, a forest of resistance that no single person could uproot. Then came the spring of 1861, when the nation finally fractured and war became reality. News filtered slowly to the plantation. First rumors, then confirmed reports. Southern states seceding, Fort Sumter fired upon, Lincoln calling for troops, the Union and Confederacy mobilizing for conflict that everyone knew would be about slavery, even if white folks in the South claimed it was about states' rights and Southern honor. The quarters buzzed with speculation and desperate hope. Would war mean freedom? Would Northern armies invade Mississippi and break the chains? Or would it just mean worse conditions as masters became paranoid and brutal, terrified of slave rebellion supporting the Union cause? Change is coming, Josiah told Lucy when he visited again that summer, bringing news from outside the plantation bubble. Whether it brings freedom or just different bondage, nobody knows yet. But the old world is dying, sister. Question is what we gonna birth from its death. What you need from me? Lucy asked, understanding that Josiah hadn't traveled 30 miles just to philosophize. Your network, your knowledge, your willingness to do what others won't. Josiah's voice dropped low. There's work ahead for those brave enough. Sabotage, resistance, making sure the Confederacy loses this war by any means necessary. You've been teaching women to poison their masters. Now I'm asking you to help organize something larger. Coordinate resistance across multiple plantations, disrupt supply lines, spread chaos that helps the Union cause. It was dangerous talk, sedition that would get them both hanged if overheard. But Lucy had stopped fearing death years ago in the bamboo cage. She'd survived the worst slavery could inflict, had killed multiple masters, had built a resistance network that was already bearing fruit. Why stop now when the stakes were highest? I'm in, Lucy said without hesitation. Tell me what needs doing. Over the next months, as war intensified and Confederate armies mobilized, Lucy's network shifted from individual revenge to organized resistance. Women she'd taught began coordinating their actions. Multiple overseers poisoned in the same week across 3 counties, creating panic among white folks who suddenly realized their slaves weren't as docile as assumed. Supplies destined for Confederate troops mysteriously spoiled. Horses came up lame. Tools broke at crucial moments. Small acts of sabotage that individually seemed like accidents but collectively crippled plantation efficiency. Colonel Wade noticed the pattern, as did other plantation owners. Meetings were held, patrols increased, interrogations conducted. But the resistance was too diffuse to pinpoint, too careful to leave evidence. The masters knew something was happening but couldn't identify the source or stop it. It's that Lucy, Wade told his fellow planters during one anxious meeting. Has to be. She's got knowledge of herbs and poisons. She moves between quarters treating folks. She's got that look in her eyes like she's planning something. I should have sold her south years ago. Should have trusted my instincts. Then sell her now, another planter suggested. Or better yet, make an example. Public whipping may be worse. Show the other slaves what happens to troublemakers. But Wade hesitated. He had no proof Lucy was involved in anything beyond healing work. Punishing her without evidence might trigger the very rebellion he feared. Might turn her into a martyr that inspired worse resistance. It was the dilemma that paralyzed many slaveholders as war progressed. How to maintain control without violence so excessive it provoked uprising. While Wade debated Lucy's fate, Union armies were advancing deeper into Confederate territory. By late 1862, Federal troops had taken control of parts of Tennessee and were pushing toward Mississippi. With them came rumors of liberation, of slaves being freed in occupied territories, of black men joining Union forces to fight for their own freedom. Lucy heard these rumors and felt hope kindle for the first time in years. Real hope, not just the cold satisfaction of revenge or the grim purpose of resistance. Hope that she might actually live to see slavery end, that her suffering and fighting might be part of something larger that succeeded. "Freedom coming," Beulah whispered to Lucy one night, her old eyes shining. "Can you feel it in the air, like a storm approaching?" The masters feel it too. That's why they're so nervous, so quick to punish. They know their time running out. "Freedom ain't free," Lucy cautioned, though she felt the same electric hope. "Gonna cost blood, theirs and ours. War's brutal, and we caught in the middle of it. But yes." She allowed herself a small smile. "Change is coming. The question is whether we survive long enough to see it." They almost didn't. In early 1863, as Union forces pushed closer to Wade's plantation, Colonel Wade made his decision. He would evacuate his most valuable slaves deeper south, away from Union advance to Texas, where slavery might survive even if the Confederacy lost the war. Lucy was on the list, too valuable as a healer, too dangerous to leave behind where Union forces might free her. But Lucy had no intention of going to Texas. She'd been sold south twice already, had lost Virginia and her family, had survived Mississippi's brutality. She wasn't running again, not when freedom might be just months or weeks away. "We have to go," Lucy told her network of women. "Not south with Wade, north toward Union lines. It's dangerous. Patrollers everywhere, dogs, armed whites hunting runaways. But if we stay, we'll be moved to Texas and lose any chance of freedom." "That's suicide," one woman protested. "My children too young to make that journey. We'd never survive." "Then you stay," Lucy said without judgment. "Everyone makes their own choice, but I'm going. I survived the cage. I survived 7 years in Mississippi. I'll survive the journey to freedom or die trying. Either way, I'm done running from freedom toward slavery." 5 women chose to go with Lucy, including Beulah, whose old body was failing but whose spirit remained fierce. "I'd rather die free than live one more day in bondage," Beulah declared. "Let's do this." They planned carefully, waiting for the night when Wade would be distracted preparing for the evacuation, when guards would be focused on preventing mass escape rather than watching individual slaves. They gathered supplies, stolen food, rough blankets, a knife Lucy had hidden years ago. They studied the stars, learned which direction was north, memorized the routes that Underground Railroad conductors had used before the war. On a moonless night in March 1863, while Wade Plantation slept uneasy with war anxiety, Lucy and her 5 companions slipped away into darkness. They moved quiet as ghosts through cotton fields toward freedom they couldn't see but could feel pulling them forward like magnetism, like destiny, like the ancestors' hands guiding them toward a future they'd never dared imagine. Behind them, the plantation, the quarters where they'd suffered, the fields where they'd labored, the big house where masters slept secure in power that was already crumbling. Ahead, Union lines somewhere in the darkness, dangerous journey through hostile territory, dogs and patrollers and 1,000 ways to die. But also ahead, freedom. The word tasted like honey and hope on Lucy's tongue as she ran. Freedom. After 28 years in bondage, after the cage and the poisons and the endless suffering, freedom was finally within reach. "Keep moving," Lucy whispered to her companions as they pushed deeper into the night. "Don't look back. Only forward, toward freedom or death, either one better than staying enslaved." They ran through darkness while hounds bayed in the distance and white men shouted orders, and the South burned itself to ashes in a war over the right to own human souls. They ran toward a future uncertain and dangerous, but their own, finally their own. And the ancestors ran with them, thousands of spirits who died in chains, who'd thrown themselves overboard rather than face bondage, who'd resisted in ways large and small and passed their strength to daughters like Lucy, who carried the fight forward. Freedom. It was coming. Blood-bought and hard-won, but coming. The cage couldn't hold her. Slavery couldn't break her. And soon, very soon, Lucy of the cage would walk free, would stand in sunlight without masters, would know peace after war, or die trying. Either way, she'd never bow again. The journey took 11 days. 11 days of hiding in swamps during daylight, traveling by night using the North Star as guide. Moving through territory where every white face meant danger and every sound might signal pursuit. Lucy led her small band of freedom seekers with the same iron determination that had carried her through the cage, sharing stolen food equally, keeping spirits up when exhaustion threatened to stop them, pushing forward even when Beulah's old legs trembled, and younger women wept from fear and fatigue. They lost one woman on the fourth night, Sarah, who'd learned poison arts from Lucy and used them against her rapist overseer. She twisted her ankle crossing a creek, couldn't keep pace, insisted the others leave her rather than risk capture. Lucy wanted to stay, wanted to carry Sarah if necessary. But the older woman was right. 5 had better chance than 6 when one was injured and slowing everyone down. "Go," Sarah said through tears. "Get to freedom, tell them what we did, what we learned, how we fought back. Make sure the story don't die even if I do." They left her hidden in a hollow tree with what food they could spare. And Lucy never learned if Sarah survived or was caught or died alone in those woods. Just another soul sacrificed to slavery's cruelty. Another name to add to the millions who'd suffered and died in bondage's long night. But the other 5 kept moving, kept pushing north toward Union lines that Josiah had told Lucy were somewhere near the Tennessee border. They passed abandoned plantations, fields gone to weeds as war disrupted agriculture. They saw columns of smoke on horizons where towns burned. They heard distant thunder that wasn't weather but artillery. The sound of armies clashing over the question of whether black folks were human beings or property. On the morning of the 11th day, as dawn broke over Mississippi hills, they encountered Union cavalry. Black soldiers in blue uniforms, former slaves now armed and fighting for their own liberation. Lucy nearly wept at the sight, at the impossible reality of black men carrying rifles, riding horses, commanding authority that would have been unthinkable just years before. "You folks running from slavery?" the sergeant asked, though the answer was obvious in their ragged clothes and desperate eyes. "Yes, sir," Lucy said, the "sir" tasting strange but good when directed at a black man in uniform. "We came from Wade Plantation, 11 days south, running toward freedom." "You found it," the sergeant said with a smile that held both pride and sadness. "Welcome to the Union. Welcome to freedom." Freedom. The word still felt unreal, like a dream Lucy might wake from to find herself back in the cage or the cotton fields. But it was real, proven by the soldiers who took them to a contraband camp where formerly enslaved people gathered under Union protection, where they received food and clean water and medical care, and most importantly, the knowledge that they would never be returned to bondage. Lucy spent 3 weeks recovering in that camp, regaining strength, processing the impossible reality that she was free, truly free. No master to obey, no overseer to fear, no cage or whip or auction block in her future. The chains, physical and spiritual, that had bound her for 28 years were finally broken. But freedom came with grief too. Grief for her mama and Jem, left behind in Virginia, and probably never to be seen again. Grief for Sarah and for Dinah, and for the countless others who'd fought and died without seeing liberation. Grief for the years lost to bondage, for the innocence destroyed in the cage, for the woman she might have been if slavery hadn't twisted her into a weapon. "What will you do now?" Beulah asked one evening as they sat outside their tent watching the sun set free over a horizon no master controlled. "I don't know," Lucy admitted. "All I've ever done is survive and fight. Don't know how to just live. Don't know who I am without rage driving me forward." "You'll figure it out," Beulah said wisely. "We all will. Freedom don't come with instructions. We gotta write our own." Lucy stayed with the Union forces for several months, working as a healer for black soldiers and refugees, using skills Aunt Dinah taught her for saving lives instead of taking them. She listened to stories from other freed people about resistance on their plantations, about overseers and masters who died mysteriously, about knowledge spreading through the quarters that taught folks they weren't helpless. Some of these stories traced back to her, to lessons she'd taught, to women she'd trained, to the network she'd built across Mississippi. Her work had spread further than she'd known, had inspired more resistance than she'd imagined. The seed planted with Blake's death had grown into something vast, a movement of quiet rebellion that had weakened the Confederacy from within while armies fought on battlefields. The war ended in 1865 with Union victory and slavery's final destruction. Lucy was 32 years old, finally and completely free. She could go anywhere, do anything, become whoever she wanted. But she carried the weight of everything she'd done, everyone she'd killed, all the poison she'd mixed and administered in slavery's long war. "Do you regret it?" a young freed woman asked Lucy one day, having heard stories about the legendary poisoner from Virginia. "The killing, I mean. Do you regret taking those lives?" Lucy thought carefully before answering. "I regret that it was necessary. Regret that the world was so broken that poison seemed like justice. But the acts themselves?" She shook her head. "No. Blake deserved death for the cage. Thornton deserved death for profiting from suffering. Every overseer and master who died from mysterious illness, they built their lives on our bondage, on our pain. They chose cruelty. I just made them pay the price." She paused, then added more softly, "But I'm glad that work is done now. Glad I can put down that burden. Glad the next generation won't have to learn poison arts to survive. They'll know freedom instead. That's what we fought for. That's what made it worth it." Years passed. Lucy never returned to Virginia, never reunited with her mama or Jem, though she sent letters through every channel she could find and prayed they'd survive to see freedom too. She eventually settled in Tennessee, married a man who'd fought with the Union, had children who were born free and would never know chains. But she never forgot, never stopped telling her story to those who'd listen, never let the memory of the cage or Blake's cruelty or the long struggle fade into comfortable forgetting. Because she understood that freedom was fragile, that justice required eternal vigilance, that the work of resistance never truly ended. It just changed forms. She became an elder in her community, a keeper of memories, a reminder of what had been endured and overcome. Young folks would visit asking about slavery times, and Lucy would tell them, not sparing the ugly parts, not pretending it was anything but horror, but also emphasizing the resistance, the fighting back, the refusal to accept bondage as natural or permanent. "We survived," Lucy would tell them, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated years and wisdom. "We resisted. We fought in ways large and small, and we won. Never forget that, we won. Freedom was bought with blood and suffering, with poison and patience, with the accumulated rage of millions who refused to die slaves. That victory cost everything. Honor it by living free, by fighting any system that tries to chain you, by remembering that power always creates its own resistance." She lived to be 73 years old, longer than most who'd survived slavery's brutality. And when she finally passed in 1906, surrounded by children and grandchildren who knew only freedom, her last words were a blessing and a warning. "Tell the story," she whispered to her gathered family. "Tell it true, the cage and the poison, the suffering and the resistance. Tell it so nobody forgets what was done to us, what we did to survive, what it cost to be free. Tell it so the next generation knows that no oppression lasts forever, that the oppressed always find ways to fight back, that justice comes slow but sure to those patient and brave enough to pursue it." And so the story was told, child. Passed down through generations, whispered in the night, spoken around fires and in churches and at family gatherings. The story of Lucy of the Cage, the girl born on a slave ship marked by prophecy, tortured for 75 days, who rose up to poison her tormentors and teach others to resist, who survived to see freedom and lived long enough to ensure the memory survived with her. The bamboo cage rotted away long ago. The plantations where Lucy suffered crumbled or were rebuilt. The masters and overseers she poisoned were buried and mostly forgotten. But her story, oh, her story lived on. lives on still, because it speaks truth about resistance and survival, about the price of freedom and the cost of bondage, about how the most powerless can find power if they're desperate and clever and patient enough. Some folks say if you walk through the old plantation grounds at night, you can still hear echoes, not of whips cracking or chains rattling, but of voices singing spirituals, of women whispering lessons about poisonous roots, of a girl who refused to break counting the days in her bamboo prison, promising vengeance that would be satisfied, who suffered, who resisted, left memory. And memory, we guard it here, in the echoes from the quarters. The ancestors watch, the spirits listen, and Lucy's name still rings like a bell of judgment, reminding us that no one's truly powerless who refuses to accept their chains, that resistance takes many forms, and that the fight for justice never ends. It just passes from one generation to the next, waiting for brave souls to carry it forward. Remember, resist, survive, be free.